I call this special call Board of Directors meeting for the City of Siloam Springs for the purpose of a joint workshop with the Planning Commission to order. Good evening. Welcome to see all you here. It's a shame you don't like each other. You're sitting so far apart. Oh, yeah, now we're supposed to do that, aren't we? Okay. All right, well, we're not going to do anything but move right through here real quick and turn this over to Philip and Don Clark. I think Don's going to be involved in this, so he's got a mic over there. So it's all yours, guys.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor and Board and Planning Commission. Every year we want to try to have a joint workshop between the Planning Commission and the Board and give everybody an opportunity to at least discuss if there's any concerns or issues that we need to try to address and deal with as we start going into the next year. Don and I thought it might be appropriate to take a few minutes tonight and talk about the comprehensive plan update and just to try to make sure that everybody is on the same page as to what the comprehensive plan is. A lot of times I think what you see usually, or what you from day-to-day interaction with the comprehensive plan, what you see it usually is a land use plan. Ben brings a rezoning and says the land use plan designates this as industrial and the request is to rezone it to industry, and therefore it's in compliance with the land use plan. And a comp plan is much broader and much larger than just a land use plan map. But the idea for a comprehensive plan is a document to sort of set the vision over the next 10 to 20 years for a city. And it's a guide. It's not the law, but it's a guide that helps us then amend the law or change the law so that we can implement that vision, if that makes sense, right? So if the concern in the city is things related to how the infrastructure is going, well, we can put some goals and some ways to implement those goals into the comprehensive plan, and then that might turn around and say we need to amend the subdivision rules and regs as it relates to undergrounding the utilities, or as it relates to wider or narrower streets, or something like that. From a zoning standpoint, the zoning, the subdivision regs are the law. That's what developers have to follow, but they are guided by the comprehensive plan. They are guided by those visions it tries to establish. And so Don will talk a little bit later about the process that we're going to go through, but we're going to try to get as much public input as possible over the next 12 months while we update the comprehensive plan. The existing comprehensive plan is 12 years old, and things have changed pretty dramatically since 12 years ago. And I always believe when you do a comprehensive plan, and we all have heard the SWOT analysis, our strengths and weaknesses, our opportunities and threats. We try to look into this crystal ball and see where, as a city, we want to go over the next 10, 12 years. And on certain things, we're going to, 10, 12 years from now, we're going to say we're right on schedule. We hit a home run there. And other things, there's going to be threats and opportunities that come up that we didn't see. So that's why it's a guide, not a regulatory document like zoning. But it drives that regulatory document. Ben is very good as it relates to the land use plan of bringing things forward and saying it either does or doesn't comply with the land use plan, and maybe it doesn't comply today with the land use plan. But we're okay with that because things have changed. That land use plan, that designation, isn't as valid today as it was 12 years ago. One of the things that we'll talk about with the consultant as we move forward, and one of the things that I think it's important to do going forward, is if it's not in compliance with the land use plan, I think we ought to take a step back and maybe consider amending the land use plan, because that's a bigger decision sometimes. If the land use plan wasn't correct, why was it not correct? And let's think about it and maybe amend that if we're also going to rezone something that's not in compliance with the land use plan. That's not a provision of the comprehensive plan today. That's why we don't do it. I think it's important to consider that as part of the revision of a future comprehensive plan. The issue when it comes to a comprehensive plan is it is truly comprehensive. I've told staff, and I've seen it many times in working with staff, where they look at the planning department and say, oh, this is their issue, they're gonna deal with this, it doesn't impact public works, it doesn't impact police and fire, and the reality is it does. The various components of a comprehensive plan are truly comprehensive, and to give you an idea, typically a comprehensive plan or a master plan for the city, you're gonna have a land use plan section, you're gonna have a utility infrastructure section, you could have urban design, historic preservation, parks, trails, public safety, public facilities, economic development component, environment, and housing. And so from a public facility standpoint, we may need to look at if we're gonna build, if as we continue to grow and we get to be, you know, we'll probably be 17,000, 18,000 people in the census, well, at what population are we gonna need fire station number 4? At what population are we gonna need a substation in the police department? And where likely will we need that? And in a comprehensive plan and public facilities map, we could map those locations. And if a developer comes in and says, I'm gonna develop that property into residential or whatever it is, the city has the ability for some period of time to set that aside and say, we need to purchase that land because that's where fire station number 4 needs to go. You know, and it still may be 5 years down the road, but we need that spot for that. So that's part of this vision of trying to figure out where the city is gonna put its public facilities in the future, where the city is gonna grow. When I arrived in 2015, in talking to everybody, it was, where's the city growing? Well, it's growing northeast. It's growing that way. That's the way we're headed. There's some growth that way, but I see more growth going north and northwest, true north almost, and down here in the southeast corner. There's more growth there. So that comprehensive plan from 12 years ago, believing it was going to go to northeast, didn't necessarily hit home. And that's okay, but that's why it needs to be updated. There are additional components in a comprehensive plan that may or may not be added into ours. Anything from regional cooperation to growth management and growth restrictions to transportation planning to sustainability planning. So all of those components are gonna come from what the consultants hear from the public. And again, Don will talk about the process of how we're gonna try to get as much public input in this time of COVID, which is very difficult. We originally intended to start this plan this year, at the beginning of the year, and then COVID came along and we were unable to do that. But I don't think we can continue to put it off any longer. The city needs to update its comprehensive plan. I don't know if that's my mic or you're looking, so hopefully we'll know where it is. I'm gonna turn it over to Don for a little bit and talk about the process and how your roles from the board and the planning commission, what your roles are gonna be in that process. We'll come back to me to talk a little bit about implementation and going forward, and then we'll open it up for questions and comments, if that's okay. Don?
Thank you, Philip. Can you hear me? All right. So, as Philip alluded to, there's going to be a process for us to update the plan. The process is going to be 4 key phases of that plan. So the first phase is going to be the public involvement, as Philip talked about. You know, a few weeks ago, I gave an update to where we were in the process, and you know, explained to you that we were exploring ways and already started working with the consultant to figure out how we can best move forward and getting that public involvement in light of the pandemic. So there's a number of different ways that we've already put on the table, and when we have the second kickoff meeting, we're going to really shape those ways. Some of those ways we've talked about are, of course, we want to develop a website where all this information can be contained and anybody can go there at any time and see where we're going through that process. So it's not so much driven about, you know, their availability. It's available to them, whether they're at work or at school. If they've got a moment, they can go and follow along with what we're doing. There will also be some ways of doing surveys and getting feedback from the community as well as an opportunity for them as we go through this plan to put their thoughts to that site so we can keep up with them. Because we understand that even when we get to the point of being able to do some public input meetings, not everybody's going to be able to make those meetings. So we want to make sure that we can get as much feedback as possible. The other things that we've talked about doing is for some small civic organizations, we could also do meeting in the box. If some of those organizations are meeting, we can take snapshots of where we're moving with the plan and get feedback from those civic groups through those meetings in the box. So we're going to continue and challenge ways. I think there's been a lot that's come out of the pandemic of, other cities that have been updating comprehensive plans or just master plans in general, and things they've used to get feedback from the public that we're going to help you understand what's going to take place in each one of those phases. So again, the public involvement, we're talking about the public feedback. This is going to be where the framework of the plan essentially starts. This is where we're going to be working to create a consensus and participation from community stakeholders that would assist with helping us shape what we think those core values and vision of the community are to make sure is represented in the plan. And then when we get to research and review, this is where the consultant is going to spend a lot of time doing some baseline analysis to provide background information about the city. It's going to be very vital to the process to help gain knowledge about where the city is today and then to help understand where it could be in the future. It is going to be during this phase where the consultant will study the historic timeline of Siloam Springs, and in studying that historic timeline, also understand major events that's impacted the physical development of the city, if you will. And then it would also help understand the historical population, the related growth that we're seeing and the growth trends. Like Philip said, a few years ago, we would have thought it was here, but now we're kind of seeing it's moving a little bit. So helping understand where those trends are going. And then also create a demographic profile, which will consist of age, of course, gender, ethnicity, income, and household type to help us understand how we need to lay out the physical development of the city. The plan development is gathering all that information and start to shape what you will see later. As Philip talked about, this is where that future land use really comes from as we start to develop this plan. As well as planning for such things as infrastructure, public facilities, housing and neighborhood, historic preservation, and potential environmental stewardship. So again, taking all those things that we've gathered and starting to really develop that plan. And then lastly, that's the production and adoption of the plan. So, it's our intent that meaningful implementation of the plan will be critical to realizing the vision of the community that will be in the final plan. And throughout that process that I'm talking about in those 4 phases is where we'll engage with the Planning Commission and the Board of Directors to make sure the initial input that we would gain from the Board and the Planning Commission will help us with shaping those vision and guiding principles and goals. And then as we get to certain points throughout those phases, we will come back to the Planning Commission and the Board of Directors and give you kind of a progress update of where we at, what we've gathered during that time, how we're proceeding. Again, I'll remind you, we're anticipating this to be an 18-month process. So throughout that time, again, early on, we'll set up some potential dates for some of those joint workshop meetings between the Planning Commission and the Board to give you those updates as we move along. And then ultimately, the role of the Planning Commission will be to stay engaged throughout the process, because this document will be brought to you for your review as in a Planning Commission meeting, and then ultimately what you will be doing is recommending the adoption of that plan to the Board, and then it will go to the Board, and then the Board will adopt that plan. In those processes after that, and that key piece of implementation, the thing that's going to be very vital from a staff perspective is that the Planning Commission, as the chief, if you will, official body for the community and the physical development, using that plan, working with staff to help us as we look at things such as current planning and long-range planning. So basically what comes to you is current planning. So understanding that long-range plan of that comprehensive plan of where we're trying to get, and use that as a guiding document, if you will. And then the other piece of it will be Two, using those goals and objectives and other elements of that comprehensive plan to help evaluate that short range planning or current planning that you see daily or weekly or monthly that comes from Ben to you guys for your review. And then for the board, as the chief legislative body of the municipality, it's going to be really important that the functions regarding the plan are going to be adhered to. You're kind of going to be the doorkeeper, if you will, of the plan, to make sure, one, we as staff are holding to that plan and what you're seeing, because, you know, if we have this plan and we're not going by it, we've put all this work into the plan of how we need to physically develop the city, but we're bringing recommendations to you that doesn't really match that plan, then, again, we as staff need to be checked on that. So you're ultimately, you know, the doorkeeper, if you will, to make sure the plan is being implemented. The future land use map that Ben brings to you will probably look different at the end of this plan. It will be changed in certain areas from what you're used to, but it will be the driving force, if you will, about how we bring forth current planning. A lot of those questions that you have today, it's hard for us to answer because, as Philip said, the current plan we have is kind of 12 years old, and it's changing so much. That's why this update is needed, and it's needed right now because we're experiencing, you know, a lot of growth. And so to start to understand where we need to be in the future, this plan is going to be very vital. So the board supporting the planning commission and staff regarding the preparation and adherence to the plan is ultimately what we'll need from you and support. I think as well, in the beginning, helping the consultant, again, they've done this, and the reason why we picked them is because what we saw in a lot of their work were cities that were similar to ours. You know, cities that were kind of on the outskirts, if you will, or of metropolitan areas that were experiencing growth, and help them get through that. And so there were things that we saw that kind of helped us feel comfortable that they would be able to help guide us through this process. So, I mean, I hope I answered your question. Answer that as far as what your roles will be in the beginning is really going to be helping and understanding, shaping that in that public engagement. So it's not only going to be coming from the public and community stakeholders, but from the Planning Commission and the board as key stakeholders as well, of helping us shape that that vision that we're looking for out of this plan and those core values. And so when it comes back to you, it will be represented in that final plan before you seek to adopt it.
One of the things that Don talked about, the goals and implementation, and I think that's very important. Cities historically have a bad rep for developing a plan, taking the plan, putting it on the shelf in the closet, and never implementing the plan, never picking it up and dealing with it again. And so one of the things that I'll be looking for in this is trying to find a way that we can come back to the Planning Commission and the board on an annual basis and say, these are the goals, this was the implementation plan, the timeline, and these are the things we've done over the course of the last year to further the comprehensive plan. We won't be able to do everything in 1 year. It's impossible depending on what the goals might be. But the idea to say we continue to push it forward. And, you know, it's a plan. One thing is likely to happen is that we will not meet every one of the goals, but as long as I think we continue as a community to push that plan forward, we're meeting those goals. We're moving in that direction. And that's the idea. That's the idea of this guiding document to say, here's where we are, there's where we want to be. How do our rules, how do our regulatory documents get us there? And that'll be part of that first piece of this, is to start amending some of the regulatory rules, which I'll talk about in just a second. The other thing, and Don mentioned stakeholders, we talked to the board a couple of weeks ago, I think, about the advisory committee. We're trying to work with the mayor to put together an advisory committee made up of residents and stakeholders. And I think it's always very important when we go through this process, when we talk about public input. Well, we want as much public input as possible. Well, who do we want it from? Well, we want it from residents. But we also want to try to identify the various stakeholder groups within the community and make sure that there's a component as it relates to that. We talk about housing. What is it about housing? It's affordable housing? Yes. Is it senior housing? Yes. Well, those are stakeholder groups, right? Historic preservation is a stakeholder group. The History Museum is a stakeholder group. small businesses, large businesses, industry are all stakeholder groups within this city. So trying to find a way to make sure that we've gained information from each one of those stakeholder groups so that everybody feels like they've got some piece of that plan and move it forward. The one thing, I've been through this a number of times, the one thing I will promise you is that nobody will get everything they want. It's just impossible to do that, but trying to make sure that there's a component on senior housing, there's a component on historic preservation, or whatever it is, on parks and trails, sidewalks, roads, whatever it is, that there's a piece in that comprehensive plan of trying to move that forward. Coming out of that, and one of the things the board has talked about and put on their goals for 2019 and 2020, was adopted in 2018, assuming we could have got through this plan earlier, was to take the guidebook, the code book, and create a unified development code. And for the Planning Commission, it's going to be very important coming out of the comprehensive plan, if that's the direction we go, because that's going to take all of those regulatory codes that you see on a regular basis and try to put them in one formal book. And I go to our code book today and I think about, if I was a developer, if I wanted to develop in this community, what are all the things I need to do and what do I need to look at in the code book? Code's got 120 chapters in it. So I got to start at chapter 54 about land use, and then I got to jump to chapter 78 about planning, and then I got to jump to chapter 87 about subdivision, and then to chapter 102 about zoning, and then back to chapter 53 about landscaping, and then back to chapter 81 about signs. And a unified development code would take all of those chapters and run them concurrently in one chapter, and it would follow that sort of progression as a developer, that I can follow very quickly what the land use plan is, where the planning side is, okay, now subdivision, now zoning, signage and landscaping and all of that. And it's much easier to read. It provides more, usually more illustrations rather than a lot of words trying to depict how things work. And it's just a much better way altogether. And you're not jumping from, you still jump from section to section within the code, but you're not jumping chapters and then going back to another chapter in a huge document like that. And that's one of the things that the board wants us to do as staff, and one of the things I think that will come out, at least from the consultants, that is a much better design for a typical code book, rather than jumping around in all of these chapters and never really knowing that you found everything that you need to know. It's very frustrating. So that's part of something that staff would like to see, and I think part of what the board wanted from a couple of years ago. So that's pretty much our presentation. I think it's going to be, it's a fun and exciting thing. I think it's, this consultant has some interesting ways to gather public information. I've seen, a long time before COVID, we had groups of 10 to 15 people getting around a big table. There was a big, huge map of the whole city on the table, and people started, with certain colors for residential, certain colors for commercial and industrial and parks, and started mapping out where they wanted those places to go. And it's a fun way, I think, of trying to figure out how you want the city to develop. And the consultant's job is to take all of that information in, from all those public meetings, from all that public information, all those stakeholder groups, and shake that all up and try to say, this is the core of where we hear that as a group the public wants the city to go, whether it be stakeholders or the public in general. This is what we heard. This is where you want to go. And here are ways to get there. These are the goals, to change the code or do this or do that as far as implementing those goals. So with that, Mr. Mayor, that's our presentation. We'll be happy to answer any questions from the Planning Commission or the board about the comprehensive plan process. And if no questions about that, about any other thing that planning commissioners or the board want to talk about and amongst yourselves or with staff or not.
Thank you, Philip. Thank you, Don. Appreciate that very much. What we normally do as a board is when we're in a workshop, we don't make it as formal where you have to be recognized by the mayor or anything like this, but just raise your hand and look around and see if somebody, obviously you can't start, don't want you to start talking if somebody else is already speaking, but just be aware of other people's times and listen to those questions that are being asked to make sure that you don't repeat one or something like that. I mean, it's going to happen, especially if you're old like me. You may have to hear it twice before it starts to sink in. But so just anyone that wants to start it off, just question and identify whether you want, if you want specifically to ask Don or Philip to ask it one of them, fine. If it's in general, you just make a general question, and one of them will jump in on it, I'm sure.
Sure. I don't know if we have an official kickoff date, but Don is working with the consultant. Don, do you know?
Yeah, so our plan is to do so we actually have a call as early as next week to start shaping this together. Our goal would be to try to start mid-January with the kickoff, so we can stay on task with a good timeline and try to wrap it up by May of 2022, if possible, barring no other interruptions.
We got 30 minutes, so ask away. Or
Last, we have to get the room back together.
well, that's true. We got to get the podium and everything like so. We got 20 plus minutes. I'm sure you're dying to ask something. Be sure and speak up. We can just barely hear you here with the mask.
That's a good question. So, as Philip talked, there's going to be different elements. We've already started to work to identify what we think those elements are going to be. What they have done already is they've already taken our current comp plan and started to digest that, and some other key documents that we've had in the city to start to digest that to help understand. There could be what we learned through this process. There could be a lot of different elements, but we're going to try to focus on the ones we think are going to be important. And so those preliminarily in that first meeting with you guys will be shown to you of what we think are going to be what we need to focus on and get your feedback.
Ed, as far as those goals relating to those elements, that's what's got to come from the public input. I mean, that's who's going to drive what those goals should be, whether it be more parks or more housing or whatever it is. That's got to come from that public input. It can't come from staff, because then the public won't buy into it. Well, and that's what Don is working with the consultant to try to get. I mean, the goal is to get as much public input as possible. And who knows, in this day and time of COVID, it might be a blessing in disguise with public input. In lieu of normal process, you have a public meeting and you invite people to come, and the consultant would tell you if you get 100 people to 4 public meetings throughout the year, that's great participation. Well, 100 people, if it's the same 100 people out of 17,000, I don't think it's that great. But I've seen processes, and it is. It might be that in this, where there's maybe more of a a focus on trying to get input through the internet and through other different means, that we get greater participation. But that we want to do as much as we can to get, and Don and the consultant have a better idea about what the plan is than I do, but the goal is to get as much public information as we can get so that all of those comments can feed what those ultimate goals become. Mm-hmm. And as I stated earlier, that's clearly one of those stakeholder groups, right? That's a subset of the residents. How do we get that information? How do we get that stakeholder input? Good comment.
Yeah, I think the other thing that's going to be very important to state is we talked about, and Philip mentioned, that comprehensive plan advisory committee that we're working to try to put together with the mayor. Is not only are they going to be ambassadors for this process, but it's also to promote those meetings and make sure that they're reaching out to those stakeholders that they're associated with. So we got to be very strategic about what stakeholder groups are a part of it, but make sure they're promoting these meetings and promoting this plan so we can get as much engagement as we can, because that's going to be very vital to the process. And so we've been strategically and very thoughtfully trying to put together that committee with the mayor to make sure we can reach into those areas and everybody's represented.
Can you share with us what the makeup of that advisory committee is, like Ted has suggested? Is there someone from the Latino community on the advisory committee?
There will be, yes. What we've tried to do is we've tried to identify the various stakeholder groups. Don and I were having a month ago or so, we were having a discussion about how do we try to create the makeup of the advisory group, and discussing with the mayor, should it be 2 people from every ward in the city? Well, that's great if we're just looking for geography, but it doesn't get the stakeholder groups necessarily. So let's try to identify the stakeholder groups, and then let's try to find a representative from that group who could represent the Latino community, represent seniors, represent historic preservation, represent small businesses, represent large businesses, and then try to work it from that standpoint. So that's what we've been trying to put together. So again, as Don stated, part of that thought process is to say, if there is a stakeholders group that we aren't getting much feedback from, maybe that advisory committee member can go and reach out to that stakeholders group and try to get more participation in the public process.
What are the numbers on that advisory?
I think right now we're, I think it's 11. It would, I think from a staff perspective, we might prefer to keep it at 7, but we couldn't do that and feel like we're meeting the stakeholder groups that needed to be represented.
So you're thinking it's 11?
I think that's Don, is that the number?
That's where we're tracking towards, yes.
Lucky number 11, as Renee says.
We always try to get them in odd, so, if you get them in even, somebody's got to be the tiebreaker. I mean, not that there's a vote here, but one of the things that, like Philip said, we want to be very attentive of who we're asking to be on this committee and make sure they understand their role and the commitment that they're putting to this. This is an 18-month process, so we're talking 8 to 10 meetings and a lot of engagement with this group as well. So it's a big commitment, and so we'll be excited to get it put together.
I think Don's waiting to hear back from the last couple of people, and we're planning on bringing that as the mayor's recommendation to the board at the next board meeting.
Correct.
I have 2 questions. The first one is whenever you figure out these groups, how is the individual going to be selected from that group? And the second one is, have we thought about asking people to volunteer and then selecting people from that to make sure, because sometimes
We tried to, in working with the mayor, try to do the stakeholder groups and then try to identify who we thought would be a good representative of that group and then ask them to volunteer. Some have said yes, some we said they couldn't do it, so we're trying to put that together and bring that to the board.
Okay, have we asked people to volunteer, like, just the general public?
We have asked general residents who aren't representing a particular stakeholders group to be on the committee, yes.
But we haven't done it community-wide.
Haven't done it community-wide, no. And I think in all the times that I've done this, doing that, you get a ton of names, and then how do you try to pick one over the other and go from there? We're trying to identify people who, as in the case of Commissioner Song's statement, if we have a particular group that we think as a stakeholder group, who could best represent that and best, if necessary, go to that stakeholders group and try to encourage them to participate. So that's been how we're trying to define that committee membership. There was a second question?
That was two. The first one was, how do you select from a?
I do have just a comment, because I've gone through this process before, and I really like the thoughts that you've put into this, because the hardest thing is getting people to participate and the diversity of the group. And I'm glad to see that you put a lot of thought and the various stakeholders, and I think that will bring people together. You can't force people to come to meetings. But I also think, because you're talking about the pandemic, that perhaps the internet and Zoom type meetings and those kind of things, people sometimes are more comfortable participating in that than being front and center. And I think you're right. I think that might help. But I'm excited about this because it's important to the city, it's important to the planning commission, it's important to the board that we have this completed. And I'm just so happy to see it get started.
Just, I give a couple words of encouragement, and since planning's here, is that as this process goes forward, 18 months is a long time. And along with Director Carroll, I've said here, we've gone through the Main Street process pre-COVID, when we met in great groups. Community building was busting at the seams. Library had great roots from Memorial Park and Chautauqua Amphitheater. Great process, and at the end of it, there are certain individuals in the community, it wasn't enough. It's never enough. At the end of this 18 months, there's going to be a few in the community, it's never going to be enough. I have no doubt that staff's going to go above and beyond. Everybody's going to participate the best that we can. But at the end of this, that's where it's at. And individual groups always surface up, and I didn't get the input, and it's usually afterwards. And so I just encourage you to remind people it's a long process. There'll be opportunity for that input. But sometimes people's voices, they just are never content. They just feel like they're never heard, and it's, and that's what it always is. We started talking about form-based codes, first a long time, feels like a long time ago, right? So, and that's that process just to get to where we are today. That's 6+ years in, something like 5 years in, something like that, maybe longer, to get where we are today. So, I want to just remind you that it's a patience game. You got to let staff do the work. You got to let the information process. People have to mull it over in their head. There'll be newspapers, social media, and I hope as we go into next year, as citizens of Siloam, it's not mudslinging. I think we're past that era, and I think we're in the era of we're in a very positive place. Other than COVID, we have a vaccine coming out. We want this to be a light for people in the community because there are positive things going on in Siloam, and it is a great community to live in.
And this, unlike in the past, we actually, I think we have a pattern with Philip as a city admin. We come up with plans, we find a funding mechanism, and we start implementing and working on this plan. So this plan is not going to sit on a shelf and then resurface, 20 years later. This is real, this is tangible, and this is something to work on. And I hope it motivates citizens to want to get more involved, right? That's our end goal, right, for everybody, to get citizens involved and participate, actively participate. So it's a very positive thing, but along that 18 months, there's going to be some moments, there's going to be some red flags, and there's going to be challenges and questions, and we're just in the process. And we're just in the process. So just remind you of that. Thank you.
Thank you for your comment. So I looked at the Northwest Arkansas Council's projection for the population of this region, the whole region. And by 2040, it will be 30% Latinos, 40% Amiga. I'm saying it's a projection for the next 20 years. So I want to make sure that Dawn has someone who can speak Spanish at least and talk to our Latino families and help them imagine how city can serve them in the future and their kids. So I think that's really critical. And I'm not sure if that happened last time or not, but I just want to make sure that we have someone who can communicate and be their voice in this process.
There's gotta be a Latino leader, rather than just a linguist, a leader.
Yeah.
As a part of that, looking back to the old comprehensive plan, as a part of designing this plan, are you guys going back into the past and seeing what sort of wants or predictions were made then and seeing how well we have accomplished them and using that to sort of shape what we're going to try and do this time?
Well, the consultant is going, as Don said, the consultant's going through a lot of old plans, right? To see what's been done in the past and what got implemented, maybe what didn't get implemented, how well it worked or how well it didn't. But they have to have that historical context, and the comprehensive plan needs to work in conjunction with other existing plans. We have a master street plan, we have drainage plans, we have sidewalk and trail plans, and all of those are kind of guides and have to work together. I can't have a comprehensive plan that says, we want to go this way, and a sidewalk and trails plan that says we want to go that way. It may change a little bit, but as long as it recognizes that other plan and it says that was done in 2017, this one's done in 2021, and now here's the direction we're going. Okay, we're good with that. But if it just ignores it, then we've got competing plans, and we can't have that. I want to piggyback on something that Brad said. Many, many years ago, the first comprehensive plan that I was really involved in as a young city planner took 2 years to get to the end of it. It's the last meeting. It's before the board. The board's expected to, it's their last chance. We're asking the board to approve it, and I'm depressed. I'm just, my boss comes to me and says, what's the matter? And I'm just, it's like I'm so depressed because everybody is upset. There's no group, there's no stakeholder groups that's just saying, yes, this is the greatest thing since sliced bread. This is it. And my boss said, it's because nobody got everything that they wanted. Everybody got something. Every stakeholders group got something that they wanted, but none of them got everything that they wanted. Whether it was parks, whether it was historic preservation, whether it was housing or transportation or whatever it was. But it was important, I think, for me to hear that, and I think it is important because the challenge that you as a board have every day when you come to these meetings, you are dealing with competing interests, competing goals, competing processes, and competing wants. And you have to balance all those as to the overall best interest of the city. And that's what that taught me was, if I'm truly historic preservation, or if I'm truly open space, or I'm truly, parks and rec, well, I want everything to be parks. And it can't all be parks. We have to have residences, and residents, you know, commercial follows rooftops. So I want all the commercial, but I don't want any more rooftops. Well, I can't have one without the other. And I think that's the goal of this comprehensive plan, is to take all of that information in, figure out what are the greatest desires within the community, and then how do we move those forward in a balanced and orderly pattern. And that's ultimately, I think, what everybody wants in the end. So it's a fascinating process. I'm excited to see us finally kick it off. It's been something I think that the city's needed for some time. I think I hated it when COVID came around, because we recognized we couldn't kick it off. We didn't know how to get it started. This consultant team has had some experience with it. I think there's some options out there, and again, we want to try to get as much public comment and input as possible. And if in those groups we can't get it, we need to try to reach out to them somehow, some way.
Yeah, and you're right. I mean, Zoom will help. I know Director Snyder talked about it. So I serve as the advisory board member to the Northwest Arkansas Council IT sector for the chapter in this region. And because of Zoom, I mean, we have folks from Bentonville there too, you know, at the same time, and we don't have to travel, and it's extremely helpful to have that discussion through Zoom.
All right, very good. Some good stuff. And I'm glad we got the interest here with not only are you stakeholders, but you're going to be part of the process in making sure that the stakeholders are involved and get them out there. And I'm one of those that was a skeptic, like on the Memorial Park. I thought it was pretty good crowds, but I wasn't as impressed or excited about it as I thought we should have had as far as the number wise. But the architects and all, they said, hey, this is a fantastic number of folks to show up. So we know from going way back that Siloam citizens will show up, but we just need to make sure that message is out there. And we got some good stuff tonight. So Don and Philip, thank you very much, and all of you who asked the questions, and thank you for participating in that area. So unless there's a objection, I'm going to adjourn this meeting so we can get set up for our regular scheduled board meeting. So this meeting is adjourned. Thank you. I call this City Board of Directors meeting for the City of Siloam Springs for December 1st, 2020 to order. Roll call.
Tappington,
Here.
Smiley,
Here.
Burns,
Here.
Hunt,
Here.
Rissler,
Here.
Coleman,
Here.
Carroll.
Here.
Would you please stand as Director Sappington leads us in our opening prayer and remain standing for the Pledge of Allegiance.
Dear Heavenly Father, we just thank you for the opportunity to serve the citizens of Siloam. We thank you for the many blessings that you've given each of us, either growing up here, moving here, and finding a place to call home. I pray that tonight that our decisions that we make are ones that we're being considerate of others that are concerned in it. And we try to make the best decisions, and sometimes we need your guidance, and we just pray that you will lay things on our heart that we need to know. I pray for each one of the staff that may be out sick or experiencing COVID with their kids, that you'll lift them up and help them to get over this quickly, and that we can move on and be able to celebrate and spend time together with the holidays. And I just thank you again for our many blessings. In your holy name, amen.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you and good evening. At this time, I want to make sure that everyone has their electronic devices silenced or muted so they don't interrupt someone while they might be speaking. At this time, we do have our public input portion of our board meeting on our agenda, and this is a time when the public may address the board of directors regarding any item on the consent agenda or any city business not listed on the board's regular agenda. If you'd like to address the board, we ask that you come forward to the podium and state your name and address and state your make your comments. Being none, we will move on to our regularly scheduled items, which begins with the consent agenda. We've got a lot of items tonight on not only the consent agenda but our regular agenda, so we'll try to keep it flowing here. So my duty here is to read the consent agenda items at this time. A. Regular meeting minutes of November 17, 2020. B. Appointments. Planning and Zoning Commission and Board of Adjustments, J.W. Smith and Ted Song. C. Appointment Parks Advisory Board, Chris Ramos. D. Appointment Northwest Arkansas Regional Airport Authority Board, Art Morris. E. Consent in lieu of meetings of the sole shareholder of the Illinois Water Development Company, Inc. F. Dedication of utility easements and right-of-ways at the 900 block of East Harvard Street, 2500 block of Orchard Hill Road, 1500 block of South Mount Olive Street, and Timothy Street. G is grant acceptance. Selective Traffic Enforcement Program, STEP, grant for the police department for a radar message board trailer in the amount of $17,000. H, Resolution 56-20, Final Plat Development Permit, Grandview Estates Phase 1, 3901 East Kenwood Street. I, Resolution 57-20, Preliminary Plat Development Permit, Lawless Road Ranch Addition Phase 1B, 2800 block of North Teresa Drive. And finally, J, Contract Public Works Street Division Drainage Pipe, Skurlock Industries, in the amount of $101,992.68. Board, what is your pleasure?
Mr. Mayor,
Yes.
I move that we approve the consent agenda as presented.
Second?
I have a motion and a second. Is there any discussion on the motion? Or anyone need anything pulled? I should have asked that before the motion, but being none, we will vote on the motion as stated on the consent agenda. Roll call?
Smiley,
Yes.
Burns,
Yes.
Hunt,
Yes.
Rissler,
Yes.
Coleman,
Yes.
Carroll,
Yes.
Sappington.
Yes.
Motion is approved. Thank you. Now we'll move into our regularly scheduled items. First is ordinance. Ordinance 20-30, third reading, amending section 102-21 of the City Municipal Code, rezoning from R2 to C2, 125A and B Kenwood Street. Ben Rhodes?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor and Board. Ben Rhodes, Senior Planner. Before you is the third reading for the rezone request to rezone 125 East Kenwood from R2 to C2. Staff has not received any additional comments on this since the second reading, and we, staff and the Planning Commission, continue to recommend approval, and we stand by for any of your questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Ben. Any comments from the audience? Being none, I'll entertain a motion to suspend on ordinance 20-30.
Mr. Mayor,
Yes, Carol.
I move that we approve ordinance 20-30 on its third reading, reading title only.
Second.
All right, we have a motion and a second to place 20-30 on its third and final reading, suspending the rules, reading title only. Is there any discussion on the motion? Being none, we'll vote on the motion as read. Roll call?
Burns,
Yes.
Hunt,
Yes.
Rissler,
Yes.
Coleman,
Yes.
Carroll,
Yes.
Sappington,
Yes.
Smiley.
Yes.
Motion is approved. Philip? Thank you, Philip. I'll now entertain a motion to adopt ordinance 20-30.
So moved.
We have a motion and a
Second.
second. We've got a second? Is there further discussion on the motion to adopt? Being none, we will vote. Roll call?
Hunt,
Yes.
Rissler,
Yes.
Coleman,
Yes.
Carroll,
Yes.
Sappington,
Yes.
Smiley,
Yes.
Burns.
Yes.
Ordinance 20-30 is adopted. Next is ordinance 20-31, third reading, amending section 102-21 of the City Municipal Code, rezoning from A1 to R1, Villa View. Make sure there's no
Thank you
more.
again, Mr. Mayor and members of the board. Before you is the third and final reading for the rezone request, the staff request at the Villa View Estates, rezoning from A1 to R1. Staff has not received new comments since the second reading. Staff and the Planning Commission continue to recommend approval, and we stand by for any of your questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Ben. Are there any comments from the audience? Being none, I'll entertain a motion to place ordinance 20-31 on its third reading, suspending rules, reading title only.
Miss,
Mayor. Oh, go ahead, Carol.
it was Marla. Go ahead.
They both sound alike. It's odd. Must be crazy.
Marla?
I would like to make a motion that we place ordinance number 20-31 on its third reading, suspending the rules and reading by title only.
We have a motion and a second. Do I have a second? Well, do I have a second?
Second.
Okay.
That hurt your feelings.
All right. Motion and a second. Is there further discussion on the motion to suspend? Being none, we will vote on the motion. Roll call?
Rissler,
Yes.
Coleman,
Yes.
Carroll,
Yes.
Sappington,
Yes.
Smiley,
Yes.
Burns,
Yes?
Hunt.
Yes.
Philip? Oh, motion is approved. Philip?
Ordinance number 20-31, an ordinance amending section 102-21 of the Siloam Springs Municipal Code, City Zoning Map, zoning from A1 to R1 properties located in the 2100 to 2500 block of Villa View Drive, the 2100 to 2700 block of Orchard Hill Road, and the 1800 to 1900 block of Sycamore Heights Road, all within the Villa View Estates addition.
Thank you, Philip. I'll now entertain a motion to adopt on ordinance 20-31.
So moved.
Second.
Motion and second. Is there further discussion on the motion to adopt? Being none, we will vote on the motion to adopt. Roll call.
Carroll,
Yes.
Sappington,
Yes.
Smiley,
Yes.
Burns,
Yes?
Hunt,
Yes.
Rissler,
Yes.
Coleman.
Yes.
Motion is approved. Ordinance 20-31 is adopted. Excuse me. Next is ordinance number 20-33, third reading, amending chapter 102, zoning, fence and driveway permits. Mr. Ben, this is quite a Ben Road show, I'm telling you.
It is, yeah. Thank you again, Mr. Mayor and Board. So before you is the third and final reading for the fence and paving permit update, requiring permits for new fence and paving that's not attached to any other type of permit. Staff and the Planning Commission continue to recommend approval, and we are available for any of your questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Ben. Any comments from the audience? Being none, I'll entertain, let's see. Have I asked for, I haven't asked for a motion yet, have I? Audience, did I ask you to talk to me? Nobody? All right. I didn't get my notes put in like today I'm supposed to, so I'm writing notes while I'm going on this. I apologize that to make sure I don't miss something. So, no comments?
Yes, I have a comment, Mr. Mayor, over here.
All right.
I believe we all got a email from a citizen that was concerned about this new ordinance. I thought he was going to be able to attend a meeting. He hasn't been able to be able to express it himself. I think his main concern was just some of the requirements for having specific documents, and I believe that Ben addressed that at some point. That he might remind me about. Let's see. If people don't know exactly what their property area is, you can help them get the documentation that they need, right?
Yeah, that's correct. We have a system called GIS, which is a mapping system that has all the zoning and lot information.
Okay.
And also links to the plats themselves. So we have all that at the office, and we can
Okay.
print that out for them if they do not have the information.
I believe that's the understanding I had, that he was most concerned about how are we going to get that information if we don't already have it. But I just wanted to confirm that you had said in those particular cases, if somebody doesn't have the plat and doesn't have all the information they need, you can assist them in getting that.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
Mr. Mayor,
Yes, Carol.
I move that we place ordinance number 20-32 on its third reading, suspending the rules and reading by title only.
Do I have a second?
Second?
Motion is second. Is there further discussion on the motion to approve? Being none, we will vote on the motion to approve. Roll call.
Coleman,
Yes.
Carroll,
Yes.
Sappington,
Yes.
Smiley,
Yes.
Burns,
Yes?
Hunt,
Yes.
Rissler.
Yes.
Motion is approved. Philip?
Ordinance number 20-32, an ordinance amending chapter 102, zoning code of the municipal code with respect to paving and fence permits and other matters.
Thank you, Philip. I'll now entertain a motion to adopt ordinance 20-32.
So moved.
Second?
Motion is second. Is there further discussion on the motion to adopt? Being none, we will vote on the motion to adopt. Roll call.
Sappington,
Yes.
Smiley,
Yes.
Burns,
Yes?
Hunt,
Yes.
Rissler,
Yes.
Coleman,
Yes.
Carroll.
Yes.
Ordinance 20-32 is adopted. Thank you. Next is ordinance 20-33. First reading. Amending section 102-21 of the City Municipal Code, rezoning from R2 to and R3 to I-1 at the 900 block of East Harvard Street. Ben Rhodes.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor and members of the board. We begin our presentations now. So you're now considering a rezoning request that's occurring at the 900 block of East Harvard Street. This is to go from R2 and R3 to I-1 industrial. The plan is to split the lot into two parts. Lot 2A, which is shown on the right side of the red line, will retain the R3 zoning, which is the existing zoning, while the remainder, which is Lot 2B, is planned to be for the future industrial zoning. Here is the zoning site plan provided by the applicant. You'll note that the proposed rezoning is tucked behind the residences on South Hyco Street in a similar manner as the industrial zones to the north and south of the site. In addition, future development of this lot requires that the applicant install screening along the green, as well as a green space buffer, which will limit construction close to the property lines. These rules are within the I-1 zone to minimize the potential impact the industrial development may have on existing or future residential properties. The screening addresses the visual impact concerns that was raised in the attached letter to the memorandum. Furthermore, the applicant did state at the Planning Commission that he will pursue a warehouse-style development with minimal perceived impacts in terms of visual impacts. So diving into the future land use map, here you see the part of the site that is designated for future industrial in the purple, with the balance of the property slated as residential. So I don't normally do two slides for the future land use map, but in this case I thought it would be good to zoom out a little bit and show the bit wider context of the neighborhood. So when we were looking at the wider view, you can see the intent behind the future land use map was to cover the residential shading for the houses that front on the west side of Hyco from Harvard got down to East Jewel. So when this map was created, the intent was to paint sort of a broader 30,000-foot view of the general areas where different land uses are appropriate. When understanding with that understanding, the orange bump out, which is basically this kind of bump out here, is intended to really represent the homes on the west side of Hyco and not necessarily the properties behind these homes. This is evidenced by the residential shading that's also shown in the industrial property that's to the south that was active at the time of this map was created, namely the area for the old Allen's facility. Therefore, staff believes that the highest and best use of this property is industrial, matching closer to the purple areas shown on the west side of this view. Finally, as mentioned earlier, the applicant is keeping the residential zoning on the southwest corner of Harvard and Hyco, right there, where there is presently no house. This will allow the continued residential development pattern on the west side of Hyco as you travel north and south. So here's the site. This is looking to the north. You can see the established residential uses on the right side with industrial to the north in the distance. And there's also a industrial to the south, which is right here. I did want to mention that we did receive a letter literally right before this meeting started So I can include that letter in the packet for the next board review at the second reading, and you can have time to study that and consider that letter. I honestly have not had a chance to read it in depth to relay it on to you right now. But with that, staff and the Planning Commission are recommending approval, and we're available for any of your questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Ben. Any comments from the audience?
Thank you. My name is Stephen Hill. I own two shop buildings at the intersection of Hyco and Jefferson. He may be referring to the letter I brought in today, and this is the content of the letter. I own the two shops at the intersection of Hyco and Jefferson Street. When those buildings were first erected in the mid-60s and early 70s, Hyco Street was narrower, and there was a drainage ditch on the east side of Hyco that adequately carried storm runoff to the north. Hyco was later widened, and the ditch was eliminated to accommodate that widening. Also, when these buildings were first built, the land behind the properties was in farm production and had the natural contours to drain runoff to the north and east. That land was later purchased by Allen County Company, flattened and paved. The result of all this alteration to the drainage in that area has resulted in my properties flooding during times of prolonged and heavy rain. On average, the last several years, my shop building, especially the 509 South Hyco building, has flooded 2 or 3 times a year. The flooding is to such an extent that the moving water carries silt and flotsam in significant enough quantities that damage has occurred to inside walls, some of my tools and equipment. As this area relies on surface drainage only, I am concerned that additional paving on the proposed rezoned property will contribute to a worsening problem that I am now dealing with. Unless the city has a plan to deal with the increased storm runoff that is sure to be contributed by this change to the topography of the roof and parking area of this new business, I stand in opposition to this proposed rezoning. Currently, the only drainage is surface drainage, and there's a small grate at the intersection of Hyco and Jefferson that's plugged up most of the time. And that water backs up into my buildings, and there's just no place for it to go. So any more contribution to increased accumulation of storm runoff there, I think is only going to contribute to my flooding problem I'm dealing with now.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm sorry, sir. Could you restate your name?
Stephen Hill.
And Mr. Hill, your address was?
The address of the properties are 509 and 507 South Hyco.
Okay. And your address?
My home address is 19980 Clark Lane. I actually live outside the city limit, but
okay.
These properties have been in my family since '65, so
okay.
I've been in possession and control of it for 55 years now.
Thank you, sir. And I saw a lot of notes being taken here, so your comments will be looked into, obviously.
Okay. Thank you very much. Would you like a copy of this?
If you want, you can give that to Is that?
I think so.
Okay,
yes.
Okay. It's the same letter? Okay, just want to make sure that we didn't lose it, and we want to make sure we have it. Is that right, Philip? Are we okay with this?
I haven't seen the letter, so I don't know. The letter was just given to the press. I just want to make sure we have a copy of the letter.
We have that. Mr. Hill, Stephen has stated that it's a copy of what he has given to Ben. Okay. All right. It looks like it from the back.
Yes.
Okay. All right. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
You bet. All right. We are still on Ordinance 20-33. Any further comments from the audience? Being none, I'll turn it over to the board for comments and/or questions of staff.
Mr. Mayor,
Yes, Marla.
I do understand because I've seen that drainage there, but I have also another concern with there is no entrance and exit road that will go straight through. It's going to be routing through a neighborhood to get through to the industrial. if you look, your industrial is over on Kenwood, the Kenwood warehouse that backs up to this property. And the road there from Hyco to Harvard, there's no exit towards maybe the railroad tracks or something. And so all those trucks and traffic's gonna go through the neighborhoods.
Yeah, you're correct. This is the primary access is East Harvard Street right here, not tying into Hyco. Again, I'm not 100% exactly how this will be developed, but my understanding is it's just going to be warehouses that's open 9 to 5 through the week. Probably not generating a lot of traffic, but I could be wrong about that if the developer changes his mind. So,
Mr. Mayor,
Yes, Minnie?
I would like a copy of the email. I think you mentioned you would include that in the packet next week, so if you could do that for the next reading, that would be appreciated. And yes, your memo says that the applicant wants to put a warehouse there, but the letter from Mr. and Mrs. Plumley that was attached as a document for this mentions a dumpster area. Am I on? Yeah, this Mr. Plumley was expressing concern about the property being changed to industrial, and he thought it was a recycling site. So do we know what's?
The initial, I can elaborate on that. The initial plan from Mr. Duggar was to do an asphalt shingle recycling center, which would just be a dumpster, essentially, that contractors would take their shingles, the used shingles, and just dump them in there, and then it would be emptied maybe once a week or something to that effect. That was never a long-term plan, from my understanding. That was just a temporary idea. When the Plumleys voiced their concerns, we let the applicant know, the developer, and he then decided not to pursue that any further, and so he entered in testimony at the Planning Commission to that effect.
So he will not be doing the recycling site, but the warehouses are for storage, or do we know?
He has not elaborated on what it will be now.
Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Ben, is anybody here from the developers to represent, ask, in case there's any, they want to make any comments that you're aware of?
The representative of the developer is here if he would like to speak.
I think we know him.
Mr. Mayor?
Yes.
That is not a Duggard.
No.
I'm not.
Well,
And
put a shovel in the hand, he can be a digger.
For a short period of time. Ron Holmeyer, Civil Engineering, 701 South Mount Olive. Mr. Duggar was unable to make it tonight. He called me about 5:45 and said he would not make it. Nothing has changed from what he proposed at Planning Commission, in that the shingle recycling plan has been just given up on because there's just too much opposition from the neighborhood. This first I've heard of any drainage issues, so I can't really address that at this point. And I'm sorry, I forgot the main reason I'm supposed to be up here.
No,
I think we were wondering what's going there, but that's what I'm wondering.
I mean, it's not going to be a huge warehouse building. It's probably going to be smaller shop buildings that he leases spaces to, whether it be subs or other small businesses and contractors, is my expectation based upon my conversations with him. Obviously, it's going to be market driven, so it could change, but that's my understanding of his plans at this point. Thank you.
Mr. Mayor,
Yes, Marla.
do we have a time frame? Is he wanting to develop it, within the next 3 years or 5 years?
I don't believe so. Do we? I think.
After you've walked to your chair. Sorry, Ron.
Ron Holmeyer again. He is not planning to build it out in a big hurry. He will do it as cash flow allows. So he'll do one building, and then as that works out and he gets the money, then he'll build another building. he has no plans to go in there and put up 15 buildings all at one time.
All right, thank you.
Okay.
This whole site is 1.8 acres, and part of it is going to be still residential, is that correct? So it's not a huge space.
Yes, that is correct. If I may go back to the slide for that. So this is the best slide. The purple area is the industrial with the remaining brownish color box at the top right. That's the residential. And then Harvard Street along the north there.
So maybe a little less than an acre and a half, maybe an acre and a quarter for the industrial part.
1.70 acres
Oh, 1.7.
is the
Oh,
exact amount.
okay.
Yeah. 0.49 for the other lot.
Okay.
Mr. Mayor?
Brad?
So I appreciate the Duggar family. If you do a little research on GIS and parcels, they own several parcels in the city of Siloam. They own some in Ward 2 specifically. You know, I didn't bring it up in board goals because I knew it wouldn't make it again, but I've been in the past, if those board members can remember, I talked in the past about a quiet zone. And I talked to city administrator about it. It costs some money, but what a quiet zone does, it allows residential development along a railroad track. And in our case, when Frank was on the board, Frank is the only citizen in Siloam, well, maybe the only one I've talked to that found the soothing sound of a train horn at 2 o'clock in the morning to put him back to sleep. So it doesn't work that way for me, but the quiet zone takes away that because they're crossings, and I don't want to elaborate on it, but we're going to keep stumbling into this for industrial development because it's hard to do residential development along a railroad track. And so as we go along in this piece of property here, if we remember years back, and I guess I am looking at my phone because it's satellite, it makes it a little bit more clear, but we've always had, there's a building on the other side of Granite that has a very difficult time moving. I think it's up for sale again. We've had all sorts of businesses in there in the past. We've had a lumber yard that went defunct, and it's now a plumbing place. And so as you go along this particular part of town, if I lived in there and I had unknown industrial activity, and the only way to access that is South Hyco and Harvard, because the way it sits now, ProPac is, I believe ProPac's in the old Allen building, and they just access everything off Kenwood. So I don't think these people are really used to like volume. They might get a little bit off Jefferson, and so I could see where that frightens them, but we are in the first reading. We've received a letter in the next packet, and something tells me if this neighborhood communicates with each other, maybe we can get some more input from them over the next second and third reading. So that'd be my word of encouragement to that neighborhood was get together and maybe reach out to the Duggar family for some clarity. And I found that communicate when we start questioning these things. I don't want to question planning. You know, I'm just not a fan of that one. I could see the concerns, but we do have a couple more readings, and I'm sure by the second reading we'll be provided maybe a little bit more information. I'm sure Ron can ask Mr. Duggar to come up with and clarify a plan so we can be transparent as we move forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Brad. Any other comments? If
Mr.
not-
Mayor?
Yes.
I just
Laura.
want to let it be known that if they want to reach out to me, it's over close to where I am in my ward. So, you know, I'd be glad to visit with them and let them see, you know, the maps and stuff that we have access to and the planning that has gone into putting industrial along the railroad tracks. And I would like to help ease some of their concerns or have their concerns brought out to Mr. Duggar.
And Mr. Mayor?
Yes, Mark.
I would encourage Director Sappington to encourage anyone that may reach out to her to reach out to all of us as well, so we all know what's.
Absolutely.
Yeah, thank you.
All right, anyone else? If not, do I have a motion?
Mayor,
Yes.
make a motion we place ordinance 20-33 on its first reading, suspending the rules and reading by title only.
Do I have a
Second.
Read, okay. We have a motion and a second. Is there further discussion on the motion to suspend? Being none, we will vote on the motion to suspend. Roll call?
Smiley,
Yes.
Burns,
Yes.
Hunt,
Yes.
Bristler,
Yes.
Coleman,
Yes.
Carroll,
Yes.
Sappington.
Yes.
Motion is approved. Philip?
Ordinance number 20-33, an ordinance amending section 102-21 of the Siloam Springs Municipal Code, City Zoning Map, rezoning from R2 to R3, rezoning from R2 and R3 to I1, property located in the 900 block of East Harvard Street.
Thank you, Philip. Now we'll move on to ordinance 20-34. First reading, amending chapter 54, annexation, zoning permits.
Yes, thank you,
Rhodes?
Excuse me. Yes, thank you again, Mr. Mayor, members of the board. It's Ben Rhodes. So we're shifting gears now and looking at a proposed code update. This will be the last update for the year. This update is to Chapter 54 of the Land Use Code. The change will require that the Planning Commission reviews and recommends on annexations with respect to the proposed zone, which will be similar to a rezoning application request. This will allow for targeted public notification, putting the burden on the petitioners wishing to annex to complete that notice. Like the last code change, we are only updating the permitting aspect and no other regulations are being changed. However, we are adding criteria by which to analyze the annexation and zoning permits, which is the same as other permits that go before the Planning Commission and also before your Board of Directors. The permit fee will be $150. This is the same as the rezoning application fee. We did reach out to area engineering firms and some realtors, and we received positive feedback. There was one comment on the application. We made that correction, and so that's good to go. If approved, the permit will go into effect early next year. And staff and the Planning Commission have looked at this, and we are recommending approval of the ordinance as presented, and we are available for any of your questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Ben. Any comments from the audience? Being none, I'll turn it over to the board for comments and or questions of staff. Being none, I will entertain a motion to suspend on ordinance 20-34.
Mayor?
Brad?
Go ahead, Brad.
No, sir. I yield this to Director Carroll, please.
You're going to make me change my notes in here, right? Okay.
So aggressive, I have to stand down. Yes, sir.
Mr. Mayor?
Brad, read.
I move that we place ordinance number 20-34 on its first reading, suspending the rules and reading by title only.
Brad, would you like to second this?
Second that,
Okay.
yes, sir.
There we go. We have a motion and a second. Is there further discussion on the motion? Being none, we will, well, let's see. Did I ask the audience participation on this? I did, to make sure. Okay. And nobody's jumped up, and I don't have any place to mark on that to do that, so apologize. Being no more questions from the board, we'll, or more discussion, we'll vote on the motion to approve or suspend. Roll call?
Burns,
Yes.
Hunt,
Yes.
Bristler,
Yes.
Coleman,
Yes.
Carroll,
Yes.
Sappington,
Yes.
Smiley.
Yes.
Motion is approved. Philip?
Ordinance number 20-34, an ordinance amending Chapter 54, Land Use Code of the Municipal Code with respect to annexation and zoning development permits.
I think we got you.
Throw my mic away. We're
I
going to
hear
get new mics.
All right. Thank you, Philip. Resolutions. We have 4 resolutions here, P through S, and well, I'll go ahead and read them, and then I'll turn it over to Philip, and he will give a presentation that will cover what the audience might anticipation of any questions or whatever that anybody might have. And he can put them all together on one, but remind the board that once Philip's presentation is over and the discussions are over, that this will require 4 separate motions on these 4 resolutions. So what we have is resolution P or 58-20 contract Siloam Springs Museum Society for $50,000. Resolution 59-20 contract Main Street Siloam Springs in the amount of $35,000. Resolution R 60-20 contract Siloam Springs Chamber of Commerce in the amount of $30,000. And Resolution 61-20 contract Retail Attractions, $30,000. Philip?
Thank you, Mayor and Board. So, per the Board's request, staff placed the Museum Society's contract, Main Street's contract, and the Chamber's contract on the Board's agenda for your review and approval. And in looking at those contracts, I found a change in the state law whereby the contract with Retail Attractions, who is a consultant to the city for retail development, also needs to be approved by the Board. Historically, the city has been contracting with the Museum Society for operation of the History Museum since about 2004, with Main Street since about 2011, with the Chamber since 2015, and my memo states Retail Attractions since 2015. I think it was actually 2016 was our first contract with Retail Attractions. And these contracts are to provide services to the city ranging from the operation of the History Museum, coordination of the Downtown Master Plan, historic preservation and economic development in downtown, economic development on a citywide basis, and retail development. In 2018, the Board approved Resolution 4118, which waived the competitive bidding requirements for services provided by the museum, Main Street, and the request for qualifications related to a retail consultant, and in both of those instances we determined that the most qualified firm for that service was Retail Attractions. So as staff reviewed the contracts based on the board's request to bring them forward, I noticed that being that they were written at different times and there was a So as part of that, I noticed that the contracts were written differently. Some had been updated, some had more appropriate provisions in them. So what you have in front of you are revised, updated contracts so that all of them are written in the same format with the same provisions as it relates to terms, as it relates to FOIA, as it relates to renewals or an opportunity to end the contract. So we've updated from that standpoint. I asked the 3 entities and also Retail Attractions to provide a budget for the monies received by the city based on Director Sappington's request, so that is in there. I asked them to just kind of provide that, how that money is going to be spent, because that was, I think, the question that the board was having, was trying to see how that money is going to be spent. Each of the contracts has a scope of services, which is what the idea for the contract is from that standpoint. The issue that I found in state law was that previously in 2019, the contracts were drafted as a one-year contract, and it had the opportunity to be renewed for one-year terms for 4 different times. The state law that I found specifically as it relates to economic development contracts requires that it cannot be automatically renewed unless approved by the board. So the contracts, assuming that the board approves them going forward, they will have to be approved annually. The Main Street contract, chamber contract, and with retail attractions contract will likely have to be approved by the board annually, not the History Museum, because it's not an economic development type contract. Mary Nolan is here as the interim director for the Museum Society to answer any questions. Stacy Morris, the executive director for Main Street, is here. Arthur Hulbert, president of the chamber and CEO, and Ricky Hayes, president of Retail Attractions, are here to answer any of your questions. Some of you are not necessarily aware of the contract with Retail Attractions. It is again, a particular contract as it relates to retail development. I can go into more of that. The history behind that is in 2015, when I arrived here in the city, one of the first meetings that I was at, the board was about to enter into a contract for $100,000 with the chamber. And I asked the board at that time to allow me to review what the contract was for and to determine what the need was. One of the provisions of that contract for that $100,000 with the chamber was the concept that the chamber would use that money and hire a retail consultant to represent the city with retailers. And if you've been in the retail business at all, you know that they speak a different language altogether, and someone having contacts and relationships with commercial developers and retailers is very important. So what I asked the board to do was to sever that dollar amount into a contract with the chamber for specific scope of services, which is generally what you have in front of you, and let the city hire a retail consultant rather than provide dollars to the chamber and let them hire a retail consultant. So that's where the contract with Retail Attractions came from, is that retail consultant. Mr. Hayes represents the city at various national conferences, the International Shopping Center Conference in Vegas every year, the Red River ICSC, International Shopping Centers Conference in Dallas-Fort Worth. He has the connections with retailers and shopping center developers, and it's a long process to continue to put the city's name in front of that. So I just kind of want to give you a little bit of history on that. And with that, Mr. Mayor, staff is available for any questions, and like I stated, representatives from all 4 organizations are also here. Thank you.
Thank you, Philip. Any comments from the audience, or any comments from the participants if they would want to make any address to the board? Being none, I'll turn it over to the board for comments and or questions of staff. And I suspect that maybe the board members might have questions of the participants in the contracts. Lisa?
So I had some citizens contact me on questions that I couldn't answer, so I'm going to ask them. The first question, I think, Philip, you answered, was should this not be through the chamber? But you answered that, why you took it out from the chamber, and why is the city promoting it and not the chamber, and why should we have to pay for it when that's a chamber job, which I can't answer that part of that question. And the other part of the question is, do we have information on what businesses they have brought in, that the Retail Attractions have brought in, and the businesses that the chamber has brought in, and how is COVID going to affect the retail attractions this year?
COVID is clearly having an impact, and I can let Mr. Hayes speak to some of that. as it relates to the first part of that question, I thought it would be more appropriate if the city was going to provide money to hire a retail consultant, that consultant should work for the city, not for the chamber, because we're ultimately paying for them. And I thought that was a better way to go. And I still think to this day it's a better way to go. The chamber is a business organization of businesses. They do economic development activities. The city also does economic development activities. As it relates to specific businesses that Mr. Hayes has brought to the city, the one that is the most prevalent is Cotton Patch. And even though Cotton Patch closed, it was nothing to do with bringing them here. It had to do with COVID and some internal management issues in Cotton Patch. Cotton Patch was moving out of Texas into Oklahoma. They were not interested in moving into Arkansas at all. Mr. Hayes works with other cities and specifically in Oklahoma, and he suggested that Cotton Patch look at Arkansas. And they said, we're not interested, we're not moving to Arkansas. He said, no, go look at Siloam Springs. There's a piece of property in Siloam Springs you need to see. It's right across the border. They came over here, and the day that they were here, they made the offer on the property, and that moved forward. It's sad to see them go, but it's been my experience that in those times we now have another opportunity to get maybe nothing wrong with Cotton Patch, but maybe a better restaurant there in the future. We have a nice building that's just waiting for a user. That spurred, in my opinion, other developments after that. You saw Rib Crib and then Cotton Patch. Across the street from Cotton Patch, we had the Shops of Siloam. I can't point to any specific one of those businesses, whether it be Popeyes, whether it be Starbucks or Freddy's, that I can directly say Ricky Hayes brought them to the city. But what I can say is his working with Cotton Patch spurred some of that development. And I can tell you that every year Mr. Hayes is in contact and talking Siloam Springs to a number of retailers. And just to name a few, anything from Applebee's to Kirkland's to Denny's to Panera Bread to Einstein's Bagels, Dress Barn, Ross, Chili's, Boot Barn, Ace Hardware, Harbert Freight. He represents the city at these conferences where there is nothing but these retailers and shopping center type developers trying to put deals together. And he is promoting our city from that standpoint. Without him, I would probably be asking for a separate personnel to be doing that also. What I also know from Mr. Hayes' experience and my prior experience is that the retail development world, a lot of it is timing and a lot of it is relationships. And when that was my number one job, it took me 5 or 6 years before I could ever say that I was able to make something happen, because it was building those relationships and finding the right time, the right place, right parcel, and knowing the people to say, here's an opportunity, let's make this happen. But Mr. Hayes can speak to some of those other issues. One of the things that he also does for the city is he's brought probably 5 different shopping center developers to the city that we've talked to. As many of you know, back in 17, when the state amended the state law as it relates to economic development and what cities can do, for some reason the state of Arkansas decided to make things like warehouses and other things economic development projects, but retail is not an economic development project. So it's hard sometimes to figure out a way to, if there's a gap, to find a way to help have the city close that gap, that financial gap. And that's been one of the struggles for a new shopping center here in Siloam Springs. One of the first ones that we dealt with, they were ready to go, and they wanted $5 million up front from the city. So that was the gap that they had. They had just finished a project in Benton, Arkansas. They didn't have that gap, but Benton, Arkansas put about $2 million worth of public infrastructure into the project. Their project was half the size, and they wanted twice the amount. And the the reason was they weren't getting all the land and the out parcels that they had in the project in Benton, Arkansas. We have run into that situation 3 or 4 different times with different developers trying to figure out how to close that gap. Retailers that want to be here, and I won't name them publicly, but many of you know them. They have stated they wanted to be here. They'll pay a higher dollar per square foot in the Springdale market near I-49, and they won't pay that price. They won't even come close to that price here. $15 a square foot, they won't pay $11 a square foot here. The developer still has land cost, he has construction cost that's the same, if not higher in some cases, than what's over in the corridor, and it creates a larger gap. And for a developer, we all know they're in it to make money. They have a profit margin that they have to make, and we may have to find how to close those gaps. We're currently been in contact with a shopping center developer, and this year I thought was going to actually happen, and then COVID hit, and everything has stopped. I believe when COVID goes away, and Mr. Hayes can speak to this in more detail, that there will be retailers who need to open new stores. One of the things that we did at the beginning in 16 in working with Ricky is to change the story of who Siloam Springs is. What is Siloam Springs? When I got here, I would say, who are we? We're a town of 15,500, southwest corner of Benton County. That's not who we are when it comes to talking to retailers. When we talk to retailers, we're a hub. We're a market hub in southwest Benton County for a trade area that has almost 50,000 people in it, for a trade area that has a median family income of $35,000, $40,000. Ricky is able to get from about 8 or 9 different sources the demographic data on that, and to find out of all that spending power from those 48,000 people, how many households are there? If there's $35,000, $40,000 median family income, what's that spending power, and where are they spending that money? And what is our sales tax leakage? And that's been a great help to try to say, if we wanted to try to provide some incentives, if I could ever find the project and make a deal happen and come before you and say, here's an incentive package that you need to put money into it, and here's why. Because maybe we would have more ability to buy things in this city that we don't have the ability today. I can't necessarily buy this shirt in this city today, and I have to go outside our market, and we lose those sales tax dollars. And that's where that benefit comes from. But it is a long-term relationship that we have to continue to work on and have to build. So that's more of a long-term answer, longer answer than you probably wanted, and I apologize for taking up the time. But that's the contract, and that's the relationship we have with Mr. Hayes. This is Ricky Hayes, if you may.
Mayor, Mayor and members of the board, I'm very honored to be with you.
Ricky, would you go ahead, just for the record and the recording, go ahead and state your name and your address,
my name's
please.
Ricky Hayes. I live in, my office is at 12150 East 96th Street North in Owasso, Oklahoma, on the north side of Tulsa. I've got to be careful how I say this, because although we're all wearing masks, I think I'm sitting next to Santa Claus, and I'm trying to be good. I think he's in the back. I'm not sure. I'm just looking at him from the side. But I want to just say to the board what a pleasure it's been working with Philip Patterson and Don, who are, in my humble opinion, we've worked in 470 cities in 39 states since we've started our company, literally all over the country. I can just say that the gene pool for city managers, especially in Oklahoma, where I'm from, is not very deep. So when I find a city manager that understands not only the detailed analysis it takes to make your market stand out, one of the things that we had to prove, and Philip touched on this, but this is this is very, very important in terms of your ability to make your market appealing to the national brands. We had to separate you from what we call the triangle. Springdale, Rogers, Bentonville get all the attention from the nationals, and they had Siloam lumped into that. And so when we talk to a retailer like TJ Maxx, they'd say, well, we're already there. Well, no, you're not. You're up in what we call the triangle cities, but this market is sustainable and potentially as deep in terms of revenue projections as that market. So that's the first thing we had to overcome. The other thing is, and Mr. Patterson touched on this as well, your chamber is head and shoulders above most chambers in the country. And I mean that. We've worked literally, again, in 39 states. I've worked alongside hundreds of chambers. And you have a great one here. But in terms of retail development, the chamber is not the primary target of information from the retail brands, primarily for one reason. Most retail deals require significant real estate transaction and many times infrastructure to be included in that transaction. And the chamber has no ability to provide infrastructure. That comes through the city. So Mr. Patterson's exactly right. From the retailer's perspective, they don't contact the chamber in terms of, they may ask questions of the chamber, and that's important. But the needs of the retail, and especially the developers, surpasses the chamber's ability to perform. And so that's the thing. It's not that we're trying to compete with the chamber or that we're better than the chamber. It's that many times the infrastructure needs and the incentive packages that cities put together for these deals, again, as Mr. Patterson's already referred to. I can tell you that earlier this year, the deal that we have seen happen in the 7 states we're working in consists of Hobby Lobby, TJ Maxx, Ross, Ulta Cosmetics, ladies, if you know who that is, a shoe deal of 1 or 2 or 3 shoe brands, usually a pet store, one of the monikers of the pet world, pet industry, and then several restaurant pads. That's the fishbowl of tenants that's growing even in COVID. Hobby Lobby is building 50 new stores next year. That's their projection, even in the middle of a pandemic. Ross and TJ are both growing very aggressively. We had a developer from Nashville who had that lineup of tenants. They're not the only developer we've had targeting that line of tenants, but they were the last group that had that group of tenants corralled when the pandemic struck. Our meeting in Vegas that Mr. Patterson referred to got canceled in May. In fact, ICSC canceled all their public meetings for the calendar year 2020, and they've already pushed the May meeting, which is the big one, the national level meeting. They've already pushed it from May of 2021 up until December of 2021. They have it scheduled in Las Vegas in December of next year. So the industry, and I will say this, when we started, when this pandemic came, I had many sleepless nights because I worked for the public sector. And I thought, well, what's going to happen? The revenues are going to go down, and I'm going to be, looking for somebody to give me a job. But that's not what happened. Revenues are up all over the country, and all of our client cities, sales tax revenues are up. And the reason is the pandemic provoked consumer spending for the essentials, and everybody wanted to make sure they had plenty of food and plenty of toilet paper, right? So sales went up, and many of those are online, and because of some new federal laws, now the online sales profit, the city of Siloam, and so you guys are a beneficiary of those sales taxes. So it's like I said, it's been a joy to work in a community, especially for this city manager, and I'm not trying to butter him up. I'm just saying I know hundreds of city managers, and many of whom do not have the personality or the intelligence of yours. And working with Don, Don's team is literally head and shoulders above what we find in most communities. And so I want to commend you guys on that. So I'll be happy to entertain any questions you have. This is a specialty field, as Mr. Patterson said. Our bread and butter is when I call a retailer, they take my call. I emailed Best Buy today. Their broker is in Dallas, Texas. And I mentioned to her I had several markets I would like for Best Buy to look at. And she wrote me immediately. I got a response in 15 minutes. And she said, Ricky, thank you. We're all ears, but we're not even working in the office. We're working from home. And until pandemic either lessens or the infection spike begins to downturn, we won't go back. So please, as soon as that happens, please contact me again. Anybody else that I know could contact Best Buy and not get a response. But because of relationships that we've built over the last 15 years, we get those responses. And so, as Mr. Patterson said, what a lot of folks think retailers just show up. They do not. Most retailers don't even consider new construction. They grow when a developer says, hey, I found a market that you may do good in. And because Academy, for one, we literally have had Academy or a representative of Academy Sports in Siloam Springs looking at real estate here when we had the group of tenants that I spoke to about. Mr. Patterson is aware of that. Now, bring them up because I got challenged in another community when a city manager didn't believe I was actually talking to Academy and called the CEO multiple times. Finally, the CEO called him back, and he said, and I won't name any names, but the CEO of Academy said to this gentleman, listen, you must think that we build buildings and look for real estate transaction. We do not. We sell hunting equipment, camping equipment, and balls. That's what we sell. We do know Mr. Hayes, and if he tells you we're looking because he has opened the door for us to look. So I say that not to brag on what we do, but to just simply kind of amplify the fact that much of the retail growth that you see in the country is relationship-based. They have a developer building for them. They follow a developer around, and the developers are who we connect with and actually bring to town. And as Mr. Patterson said, we've been here with a half a dozen over the 4 years that we've worked for him, and that's pretty unusual. And I just think that it's been such a joy to work here, and I'd like to continue doing that. So, any questions? I'd be happy to entertain. I don't want to take your time.
Thank you.
You bet.
Thank you. Any other questions? Oh, Arthur?
Would this be a good time to talk on behalf of the chamber, or are you going to vote separately?
Do what?
Separate votes.
Well, they're all separate votes. They're separate votes, yes. Yeah. Okay.
Mr. Mayor?
Yes.
I'm the one that brought some of this attention to the forefront because, of course, this is what I understand. And looking at some of it, it worried me that we weren't seeing where our money was going. I think transparency is a valuable tool when we're spending the community's money. I asked for Mr. Patterson to send me the reports that they're required to file yearly. And there wasn't consistency. And I think that our requirements need to be consistent among the 3 or 4 that we're contracting with, because this is for the betterment of Siloam.
Marla, excuse me, did you say there wasn't or there was consistency?
There is not consistency in the format in which they do their reports. And there was some budget and expenditures that wasn't there. I pulled their 990s, which is public access. I want to commend Mr. Warden for doing the one for the museum himself and not having to pay $2,500 for that to be done. I also want to say the museum does a wonderful job in listing out what their expectations are and what we get from the contract with them. I then jump over to the chamber and to Main Street, and that's where my concerning comes, because they just list hours. And I looked up, and Main Street is their reflection of 2,000 and some hours, 52 weeks a year. That's over 40 hours a week, and it's $16 an hour. Then I look at the chamber, and less than 1,000, and it's over $30 an hour we're paying for their service. But then again, what service are we getting? And I've researched some towns and looked at what the chamber contracts are, and also some of the other, perhaps if we had a visitors bureau and stuff, some of the requirements. And I think that we really need to clean up and be consistent. I think that we need to make our requirements a little more stiff. I think we need to be submitted a budget, expenditures, where the money's going. I would like to know from the chamber how many businesses they contacted on our behalf, how many services they provided to our community. And I'm not dreaming this up. I've got it from a chamber contract with a smaller city. And, you know, I just think as a responsible citizen and as a board member, we need to be transparent, and we need to require the same thing from each one of them.
Mr. Mayor,
Yes, Mindy?
can I just clarify? I know we're voting on these as separate motions, but we've heard from Mr. Hayes, and he's the last on the list, so I'm assuming we can question any of it right now. Okay, I just want, because Mr. Holbert asked to speak, and I think it would be okay for him to speak now, wouldn't it, if we're talking about all at the same time?
These all require we have four separate motions, so whenever we get down to the chamber, that'd be the best time for Arthur to make his comment, I think. Otherwise, we're gonna start bouncing around, and we may
Mayor?
leave somebody, yeah, Brad?
I don't want to hear from sales pitches from people, because that's what I just heard. I think what Director Sappington is wanting going forward into 2021 is some sort of spreadsheet format that reflects the monies that being spent. So 35 for Main Street, 30 for Chamber, create a spreadsheet, make it straightforward, because applaud it. Arthur's going to get up here and give a great sales pitch, just like his guy before him. I don't want to say I don't want to waste my time. That was not the intent that I'm getting from Director Sappington. We just want to be clarity on numbers and have some sort of sheet. Maybe the museum is the format. But that's something the city administrator needs to work on. But we're going to spend an hour of sales pitch, and I'm not in.
Well, and Mr. Mayor, I agree with what you're saying. I was just trying to get clarification on when we could discuss what. I am not. I agree that there needs to be consistency with how any organizations that the city is giving funds to. We, as a board, received the quarterly reports from Main Street and Chamber. I don't remember seeing quarterly reports from Retail Attractions or the museum. I felt like the reports were providing the information that we were asking for, which is basically what Exhibit B states, which is a form that Mr. Patterson put forward that has these organizations address what their contractual obligation task is, what they did in relation to that task, and then how many hours. I think I was a little confused because the packet information that we got had the budget information. It looked to me like it was just showing this is the overall category of task, and here's the number of hours without the description, but that information was in a separate quarterly report that we got separately outside of this packet. Again, I saw that for Chamber and Main Street, not for the museum and not for retail, and I would be supportive of consistent reporting from all four organizations. I think that would be helpful. The reason I was asking about the Chamber in particular, I do have a question for the Chamber in relation to some of what they've budgeted their hours for. So if I can ask that question now, and I'll kind of preface it with when I think of chambers of commerce, I think of one of their primary roles being business development work, like some of the things you all have done with training of small businesses. You hosted the Small Business Corps, you planned career fairs, you worked with businesses to develop makerspace. You know, those are the kinds of things that are involved in business development. And for the 2021 budget, you are budgeting 480 hours toward that particular task, and a total of 958 hours of contract work, but 480 hours of that is for business and community development. But with business development being a primary role for chambers in general, I would think it might be something that would be done by the Siloam Chamber even without receiving city funds for it. So I'm wondering if there's some other service, something that wouldn't be done by the Chamber anyway, that those hours, which are over half of what you're budgeting for hours spent toward the contractual obligations, is there something else those hours could be used for? And also the 480 hours you are dedicating to that particular task is more than twice as much as you've spent the last 2 years on that. And so I think there's a question in there, but I think the primary one is, if that's something that chambers do anyway, is there something else that the city could pay toward?
Sure, come on.
Thank you very much, Mayor, Board of Directors. Arthur Holbert, 20705 Highway 16, Siloam Springs. I do appreciate the opportunity to share with you all. I absolutely answer your question, and Director, I definitely don't want to give a sales pitch, but I would like 3 minutes to kind of share what your money did go to this last year, the accomplishments that happened because of your generosity and your investment in the Chamber, and specifically how the city benefited, and then specifically we'll address your questions. Because of y'all and your generosity, as you know, we did open a makerspace. We do have things that are being built and developed there. Some people are making Christmas presents for them. We have businesses utilizing the space. One of the main things we did when COVID hit, we coordinated relationships with JVU, the city, Siloam. We helped facilitate the PPP grants and loans that actually brought specifically millions and millions of dollars to our town. One particular business got over $3 million because of that, and the communications there. We've helped with the PPP grants and what have you there. The Chamber personally just bought masks and gave them out to the community, people that weren't in the Chamber. Some were, some weren't. We just did it to pretty much throughout the community to help encourage that, or so they could stay open. We've had the events, but I won't go through the details on those. Basically, we've helped a local business go from making pet toys to making face shields throughout America, over 100,000 just for the state of Oklahoma. Specifically, when you talk about businesses, we've actually helped six businesses actually start from scratch inside the Chamber of Commerce. What does that mean? That means that we actually applied for them. They got their federal ID number with the federal government inside the Chamber. We actually did the paperwork with the Arkansas Secretary of State, got them incorporated inside the Chamber of Commerce. So 6 businesses there. I can give you the details on those if you want to know specifically who they are the next time. We have done the courses, as you know. We've put together a group of investors to potentially buy struggling businesses. From an AEDC standpoint, that was back to part of your question. Like tomorrow morning, I will be in Little Rock for an 8-hour meeting that will be meeting with executives for AEDC, learning new strategies and processes of how we can bring businesses into our community. And I appreciate his comments over here when you look, okay, specifically what businesses were brought in by the chamber, what businesses were brought in there. It's really a community collective effort. I mean, I meet with Philip monthly to every 2 months discussing buildings that are open, businesses coming in. Sometimes I make a contact, sometimes I make a communication, sometimes it's a city. There's one specific building on 412, Dogwood Junction. Basically, I personally help facilitate the relationship there for a couple of businesses to go inside of that. Some stuff I can talk about in a public forum. Some stuff, like Philip has said, I can't talk about in a public forum, but I think y'all deserve to have your questions answered. Sometimes we do polls for you when board members ask for us to do polls for the city of Silent Springs. We do those. We basically have helped take the lead on COVID for the city and this overall community. We help Gates get on-site COVID testing. I would say that's economic development. It helps keep a big employer in our town from their employees on site. So we got on-site COVID testing from them. Within 30 minutes of the ask, we had on-site COVID testing arranged for Gates. Basically, in terms of Hispanic, we basically reached out and we've converted everything to Spanish. We've created a Women and Minority Scholarship Foundation for women and minority-owned businesses. And we've basically started that in the last 60 days and having great interest and a lot of success with that. And we now have everything converted in Spanish. That's pretty much it. And we've helped specific businesses to get grants. So the economic development piece. I would say my skill set is probably a little different than maybe my predecessors. My skill set specifically has been in the area of businesses, starting, building, growing from scratch, to developing businesses, to helping sell businesses, economic development. What does that mean? That means different things to different people, right? I know that if someone walks in here and they don't have a business and they leave and they have a legal entity business, a business was born in the chamber. And that is what's been happening. I know that if you have an empty building and all of a sudden there's people in it and you help facilitate a contract and some relationships, I'd say that was a positive thing. In terms of the hours, basically we were asked to do a budget. Basically it didn't say put all of your budget money in the form of hours, right? Basically my contract with the city requires us to go to meetings. Those meetings have overnight hotel stays required. They have mileage required to stay. So basically my budget had mileage, travel expenses. Tomorrow I will be in Little Rock, there and back. Supposed to have 2 nights in a hotel for a 2-day trip. I'm actually not staying in the hotel. We're going to do that. And we'll come back, we'll give a report to Philip on what we learned, and we'll go from there. So I think that addresses that. I don't know if I did or not.
Well, I think so to some extent, and by all means, I appreciate the work that the chamber does, and you all have a lot going on down there.
Good stuff.
A lot of good things going on. Much of what you said did relate to business development, which, as I mentioned to begin with, is something that chambers typically do. So is that something that would be done regardless of whether you get the funding from the city? And it seems it probably would be, because that's one of your primary roles. So
what's different?
So what could possibly be done? We're not going to settle this tonight, but thinking outside the box, what could possibly be done to add value to the city?
Right. I think from my conversations with Philip, is that we're kind of the liaison or representative with AEDC. AEDC is where so much of the federal and state information comes out that helps to benefit business. So basically, we get it, we attend the meetings, we shoot it out. Every now and then you guys get the emails of, okay, there was one I sent out this last week, all these tax credits that these businesses will get because of COVID. They wouldn't know about it otherwise. This scholarship foundation put for women and minority businesses, there's over 200 women businesses that didn't have access to this stuff until we started a scholarship foundation, which we're helping to push that information out. The meetings with AEDC that we've been asked to go to, we've been asked to go to the state meetings, the local meetings, and then we collaborate specifically with the city. I would say the biggest, from a one sentence answer, would be the involvement specifically with AEDC. Hence the reason
But
I'll
you
be gone
dedicated fewer hours to that, and you dedicated a whole lot of hours to the business community development. That's what I'm
It
getting at.
comes down to semantics, and to me, it's more semantics and what do you want to label one thing or another. A budget is a budget. If the directors ask us to do a survey on whether or not the city should vote for masks, or whether or not the city should do this or that or the other, we will do it. I mean, what do you stick that in a category, right? When half the phone calls that the chamber gets every day are actually for the city, and that is not a lie. Probably half the phone calls we get, we're basically the answering service for the city of Siloam Springs. And in terms of economic development, we're basically helping business start, build, and grow.
Yeah.
And I would say the AEDC is this thing uniquely different that we would not be doing.
Right.
We would not be doing
and
that.
I do agree with that. So there may even be more time dedicated to that than is reflected on your budget.
It's the first time we've been asked to do a budget in terms of what we submitted in the past is exactly what we've been asked to do. Yeah. I've been there less than a year. Basically, you had categories. Each category was in the contract, and it said list the number of hours. It didn't say a certain minimum number of hours.
Well, actually, your quarterly report, the number of hours is set, the quarterly report did indicate what the contractual obligation was, and then what you did in relation to that. So I feel like you were providing the information.
Yes, ma'am, we did do that. To my knowledge, we've done everything we've been asked to do.
Mr. Mayor,
Yes, Marla?
my problem with this is that it's not consistent from one agency to the next.
Yes, ma'am.
I know you all do your job and you do it very well, but when you report, you need to have standards. And it is our responsibility to see that you get those standards. And I can give a copy of what I've got to Philip and he can look over it, but it's just saying that we need to be consistent, because if I was looking at any of this, I would say, well, you can just make up numbers and just, fill it in and we're good to go. No, I want to know if you contacted 6 different businesses in November and 3 of them have decided to come visit. I want to know those things. I want to see that you're doing what you need to do for the community, and maybe even more so than Mr. Hayes is doing. Shout what you're good at.
Right.
But we need to be consistent, and that's all that I wanted to do, was to look at how much money we're giving you and what we're getting for it.
Yes, ma'am. And on the hourly rate, it was based on someone getting $20 an hour, and then when you look at the benefit piece, so we got the $24 an hour is what the hourly rate was.
Yeah, I figured it at 31, I think.
That's because some of that is not hourly based, it's based on expenses.
Yes,
I have a question, and not so much for retail attractions, because you're a limited liability company, but the nonprofits, what percentage of this contract is your budget?
What percentage of this is I'm gonna say about 8%.
8?
And that's a rough math off the top of my head. If you want me to pull out a calculator, I will. But roughly, it'd be less than 10%, probably more like 8%.
Okay.
I can share. I've got the 990s that show the salaries and the different expenditures, the grants, any funding that's received, and I can share that with the rest of the board. And I only pull those because transparency, we need to be able to see that. These are public documents and you're working for the public.
Thank you. Any other questions?
For the other 2, I'd like to know what just so they know, just so we had an answer tonight, because I was asked that question by the citizen. For the museum and for Main Street, what percentage?
Ours is less than a fourth of our budget. That's just my best estimate being asked. So, anything else?
7%. Okay, a citizen asked that, and I like to be able to answer their questions.
Yes, Mary Nolan with the museum. And we've had, as far as our income goes, I would say it's probably almost 75% of our income comes from the 50,000 you give us. But we're usually able to have a net income of about 68,000 in 2018 and 75,000 in 2019. So we've been able to do some fundraisers and some different things that has increased that amount for us. Not this year, okay? Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Mr. Mayor.
Yeah, just a second. Is it the Main Street? Okay, I'm sorry, I certainly don't recognize you without the mask and what have you. I need you to state your name and address, and maybe restate that it was
Sure.
it's like 25% of your budget or something like that. Okay.
Stacy Morris with Main Street, Siloam Springs. My address is 16689 Old Highway 68 in Siloam, and our contract is less than a fourth of our budget.
Thank you. Thank you. Sorry about that. I missed that. I'll try to catch you when you're up there, but Carol?
When we first started doing these contracts, we did, in my understanding, even when we had some other nonprofits involved, it was a percentage. We were wanting to know the percentage of our money based on their total income. But I don't know that you can do that. The museum is totally different than the chamber, I think. I don't know if how you're trying to express percentages or whatever, but just wait a minute, okay? Because the museum doesn't have the capability, I don't think, to bring as much income in as the chamber does, because the chamber has these businesses and they have membership fees that they bring in. Main Street has some ability to bring income in. My other question, and this is totally different, but my other question is, and I'm going back to the meeting that we had last time where Director Sappington made the comment that they were going to lose their nonprofit status. And I'm still trying to wrap my head around that, if that is something that is a concern.
May I speak?
Well, yeah.
Okay. I said they need to look into it, because if it's not a contract, if it's a grant, how the funds are spent, 501c6s are different than 501c3s. And if we're offering the same contract with both of them, the wording and everything, and Jay can, he can attest the fact that you need to watch your wording. I'm a 501c3, and I could not get funding like Arthur does at a 501c6. It's different. And you need to watch the wording of the contracts, just like Philip said. When they went over, they found some of the wording they needed to work on. We need to be consistent and have the right contracts. It's not our duty to protect them. It's their duty. But as a city, we need to be upfront, transparent as much as we can. And yes, a budget, they're $990, all of that needs to be available for citizens. And that's all I asked. I didn't need a sales pitch. I know you all would do good. I know. I just wanted us to be consistent and fair and show the public what we're getting for our money. And I didn't feel like if you said you did so many hours of this, you're telling what you're done. I want to know that, we had Thursday night ladies night, or we had the Dogwood Festival, or we didn't get to have the Dogwood Festival. I want to know the actual. Anybody can do the pie in the sky and divide it up into percentages. I want to know what you're actually doing for the money that we give you. And yes, every grant you write, if it's a substantial one, they want to know what percent of your operating cost are my funds. We're not asking them to do that, but you can ask every one of them. If you've written a grant, you have to submit that. All I said is if the board needs to look at this and make sure we're consistent, we're transparent, and we're finding out what's being actually done for our money. And that's it. Because you're doing good. We just need a different format for your reports.
Mr. Mayor?
Brad?
So I'll go back. I'm gonna make a motion that we get on with this, but, apparently that, Philip has some work going into next year, to see whatever that mess is about, but I'll speak specifically for Ward 2. It's pretty apparent for me what Main Street does because we've implemented some of those plans of action right here at the board. It is not the generosity of the board. We're giving money away. We did $12,500 outside a $30,000 budget for a member here, and we do expect something to be produced from that. So thanks for that sales pitch. But when I look down St. Nicholas Avenue, which I'm assuming on December 1, Broadway has gone back to St. Nicholas Avenue for the month or till Christmas. But when I look down there, I see it. It's tangible. I can walk it, I can touch it, I can feel it. Some of these contracts is not that way. And I think the city administrator did a great job explaining that early on in this conversation. And for the average citizen, that is difficult. So if it helps Director Sappington's folks out there, obviously that's something that the city administrator will work on to try to figure out that format. But having said that, I'd like to make a motion and get voting on these contracts, please.
I will second that request. Brad, do you like to make a motion on resolution 58-20?
Yes, I'd like to approve resolution 58-20 approving a 2021 service contract with Siloam Springs Museum Society.
Second.
Marla? Okay.
Mindy.
Was that Mindy? Okay, I thought that was Marla. Okay.
So did I.
All right. We have a motion and a second. Is there any further discussion on the motion?
Mr. Mayor, there's not further discussion on the motion, but there is the question. Director Sappington has expressed what her desire is for consistent reporting. I would agree with that. I do think it's in place, but maybe it needs to be tweaked a little bit. So how does that happen? Is that just notes you're taking and we don't have to do a motion about that? Or do we need to come up with a motion for?
Good point, I guess. I'm not sure. Philip, you want to explain that?
Sorry.
I'm not sure where.
I'm not sure I'm not sure how to answer it. I'm not sure. I have no problem in trying to come up with an Exhibit B, similar to what Exhibit B is in the chamber contract. I did that a few years ago because I didn't feel like the chamber at the time was providing what I thought was very clear as to what they were doing as it relates to those particular headings in their scope of services. I felt that the museum reporting was very clear as to what they were doing as it relates to their scope of services, and the same with Main Street. With Mr. Hayes, he provides a monthly report as it relates to his contacts and who he's contacted. But I don't have an issue, I don't believe, as it relates to if it's the board's wish to have all four of these, or at least the three nonprofits, which I would say are separate and need to be separated from the private business, to have a similar reporting style, I would say you might want to make that as part of your motion so that it's very clear. And I don't know exactly what that style is. That's my unknown. I don't know what it is as far as a format wise that this board is looking for in that report. That's unclear to me. I'm happy to work with Director Sappington to try to formulate that and figure that out. But I can't say that I have a clear direction as to what that is.
Okay.
Well, since that was a comment made, I just wanted to get some input on it, or just ask a question about it. But since it was Director Sappington's proposal to begin with, or concern to begin with, I'll let you decide what you want to do with it.
Comment on, Marla?
Well, we have a motion on the floor.
We have a motion, and this is part of the motion, is discussion. This discussion can be part of that motion.
I do feel like that we do need to look into the requirements to reporting. And I have stuff that I can share with you if you would want me to do so. And I think looking forward, we need to ask them to do that next year.
You're looking for some consistency in the way it's received by the city as they report. The best they can do for that particular entity. Some of them are just going to be a little bit different, especially when you're dealing with nonprofits and a private business.
Absolutely.
Director Sappington, if I may, when you say next year, are you speaking 2021 or 2022?
2021 with our first quarterly report, end of March.
So if
It's really difficult to tell you what until I can show you.
I understand. So what I would suggest is that you make a friendly amendment to Director Burns' motion that the approval of the contract to the museum is subject to adding a template as Exhibit B for the formatting, or however you want to say it, for their quarterly reports.
Absolutely.
And then you
As
need a
you
second,
stated.
and I think Jay will have to speak up as to what's the process. I think the original maker of the motion has to accept your amendment or
Accept
something
the
along those
amendment.
lines.
That's correct. And then the proposed amendment would be voted on first in the main motion.
Okay. Renee, you got that so far?
Nope. Director Burns, will you accept my amendment to your motion?
I don't think you've clarified it, Director Sabatini. I've lost half my life listening to this lineup. Yes.
So, yes.
Okay, so Brad has a motion and Mindy has a second. Marla wants to amend or have Brad amend his motion to include wording that says, subject to attaching a template for reporting on their quarterly reports.
Yes.
And Marla needs a second to that.
But that's the motion.
Yes.
Okay.
Question is, does Marla
We have-
get a second?
Does Marla need a second? Marla needs a second for the
For my
on the
motion.
amendment. I think Lisa.
No, I seconded Brad. Now Marla needs a second for her
Are you,
amendment
Lisa?
to it.
I'll second it.
Okay. Got that, Renee?
Yeah.
Okay.
Hello, friend.
Does this require two separate votes? Okay. Do we have to vote on which one first? We make sure
Amendment.
the amendment prior to the initial motion. Okay. I think we've probably discussed this enough. It's time to vote, and so we'll vote on the amendment to the motion. And we're on the museum. We're on the museum right now, correct? Amendment to the motion.
I am still totally confused about consistency. Are we wanting a template that is totally the same for all three nonprofits? Is that what you're looking for? Yes. Okay.
I think
That's
that's
my
what
understanding.
How you do that.
I got. That's what I got.
Which I think is basically Exhibit B in our packet.
What Director Hunt is referring to is Exhibit B to the chamber contract.
But
Like
could
their
be
Exhibit
used
B.
for all three.
But having that similar format to be for all three nonprofits. It may not be exact because there's different wording in their scope of services, but having something like that, I believe is what Director Staffing is saying. It's not as specific. It is actually a template, Director Staffing, they list what they did under those headings.
I think we can build upon it.
All right. Everybody comfortable with what we just discussed? Carol?
I am.
Okay. Brad? It's not your this is the amendment to your motion, so are you good with this?
Mayor, the only reason
Get-
I'm agreeing with this is
You
because
wanna
I
move-
think
you-
it's the same data that we have in front of us right now. It's just gonna be worded differently. That's all it is.
And it's gonna be in the same order and everything like this, so.
One of the directors, and I'm willing to do that to move
To
forward.
move forward, okay.
So we can get these contracts going and we can get past 2020 and let these people go to work.
All right. Okay. So Renee, you think you have what you need?
I think we're voting on the amendment first. Roll call.
Voting on the amendment, yes. Right. And you got all what you think you're gonna need on that verbiage, okay. Then let's vote. Roll call on the amendment.
Hunt,
Yes.
Rissler,
Yes.
Coleman,
No.
Carroll,
Yes.
Sappington,
Yes.
Smiley,
Yes.
Burns.
Yes.
The motion on the amendment is passed. Now we will vote on the original motion.
Amended motion.
On the motion as amended.
Yes.
By motion.
We're still
Do I-
just on the museum, correct?
So we're still on the museum, so do I have a motion to approve the amended?
Have a motion.
We
You
already have
a
that,
motion.
so,
Have the
so we've
motion
got
from
it.
Brad.
We just need to
Need a
vote.
vote.
All right, let's vote. Roll call.
Rissler,
Yes.
Coleman,
Yes.
Carroll,
Yes.
Sappington,
Yes.
Smiley,
Yes.
Burns,
Yes.
Hunt.
Yes.
The motion is approved. And I'm gonna look forward to seeing Renee, how she gets, you're not gonna have this ready tonight for me to sign, are you, Renee?
Nope.
Okay. Let's move on to Resolution 59-20. Contract?
Maybe we need to let Marla make the motion.
I make a motion to amend the resolution to include changes to the reporting through a template that can be applied to all three nonprofits.
Okay. We did one separately. We did same, is that the same thing that we just did for the museum?
Right, we're gonna have to do it for each one.
Okay.
Now that is a single motion that includes the previous amendment in the original motion.
Okay.
Need a second.
I
Second.
guess, and are we still on the museum?
No, you're on
No.
Main
We're on the
Street.
okay, that's where I got lost. I thought we're on Main Street right now.
Andy second.
And I say yes.
Motion,
Second.
okay, and second by Director Hunt. Everybody understand where you are? You're the ones that are voting on this thing. You gotta make sure you understand it.
Yep.
Everybody okay? We have a motion and a second. I guess we haven't asked anybody from the public if they have any comments, but, all right. We'll vote on the motion, amended motion.
The motion.
The amended motion, the motion,
The motion. The motion as stated.
as Director
Sappington
Staffing
stated.
did, okay, I'm a little bit lost here.
And Mr. Mayor,
Yeah.
Director Sappington's motion is gonna cover the next three, or, No, okay.
Director Sappington's
Okay, so-
motion
No.
is that
okay,
you approve
gotcha.
the Main Street contract subject to.
Okay, so each one of them will do the same way? Yes, okay.
But they're gonna be, the verbiage will be the same for all three of them.
Yes.
I'm assuming that to be true,
Oh,
or at
that's
least
what
all three nonprofits, so.
On the three nonprofits, yes, on the three nonprofits. So we have we're just gonna say we have a motion here. I don't know how this is gonna come out, but,
Have a motion and a second.
we have a motion and a second. But we're calling it amended, but we never even we're not calling it amended.
Mayor, you just need a vote.
Roll call.
Bob Coleman.
Yes.
Carol.
Yes.
Marla Sappington.
Yes.
Carol Smiley.
Yes.
Brad Burns.
Yes.
Mindy Hunt.
Yes.
Lisa Rissler.
Yes.
Motion is approved. Resolution 6020. Same thing. Who wants to make the motion?
Make a motion.
Make the motion?
Yep.
Lisa?
Resolution
Is that Lisa?
6020.
Lisa?
Make a motion, what's the motion?
To approve resolution 620 contract to Siloam Springs Chamber of Commerce.
With
Subject to?
amendment.
Oh,
Subject
the
to.
amendment.
Subject.
I keep forgetting the amendment. I make a motion for the amendment.
So-
For the consistency of the template.
If I may.
Yeah.
Director Ressler moves to approve, subject to the template, the reporting template being similar to the other three nonprofits.
Other two nonprofits.
Other
yeah.
two nonprofits.
Right. You got that, Renee?
Yep.
Okay.
Need a second.
We need a second.
Second.
We have a second. You all ready to vote? Roll call.
Carol.
Yes.
Sappington.
Yes.
Smiley.
Yes.
Burns.
Yes.
Hunt.
Yes.
Rissler.
Yes.
Coleman.
Yes. Was that Main Street or was that Chamber?
That's the chamber.
That was a Chamber, okay. So now when we're down to contract on retail attractions, number
No, we gotta
61-20.
61-20, yes.
Right.
Mr. Mayor,
Yes.
I move that we approve resolution number 6120, approving 2021 service contracts with retail attractions.
Second.
Right, okay. Very good. No amendments on this one. Good. All right, is there further discussion on that motion? Any comments from the audience? They just want out of here. I do too. All right, we have a motion and a second. All those roll call, excuse me. Did we do a roll call on the chamber? Okay, making sure. I didn't mark it down. Okay, roll call on the motion on the retail attraction contract. Roll call.
Sappington.
Yes.
Smiley.
Yes.
Burns.
Yes.
Hunt.
Yes.
Rissler.
Yes.
Coleman.
Yes.
Carol.
Yes.
All right.
Need a recess.
It was approved, Reggie. Thank you, sir. All right, that's everybody. We're down to.
Thank you all.
Thank you all. Thank you all.
Thank you very much.
Staff
Thank
reports. Philip?
Want to update the board on staffing levels. Director Ressler asked a month or so ago for a report on staffing levels, so they're prepared to discuss historical staffing levels, where we are today and where we'd like to be in the future, and sort of a timeline on how we propose, subject to budgets, to try to get there. So if that's okay, Chief?
Chief.
Ready? Alan Gilbert, Siloam Springs Police Department, Chief of Police. When looking for this kind of information, it's kind of hard, setting the bar where it comes to officers per population. I did find some good information. Bill McGoggles, this rate goes back always to 2019 to around 12. And the rate is basically 2.4 to 2.5 officers per 1,000 population. I found another report. It's a FBI Uniform Crime Report, UCR. And without reading all that, it's basically 13,247 cities are involved, and they give data. And that data also comes back, and this is current as 2019, which is about 2.4 officers per 1,000 population. Out in the county, it could be a little bit more. Their study shows it's 2.8 per 1,000 population. To give you a little bit, I'm sorry, there we go. I just gave you that FBI Uniform Crime Report. And then we're going to go into a lot of this information. It's information that I had my staff, and we spent a time pulling this up. Right now, our estimated population is 17,685. The daytime population, again, when you're looking as police, the population of the city, the population is 17,000, almost 18,000 people. We actually, as police officers, we police the daytime population, where studies from community development is 24,000. We have about 24,000 during the work week. 30,000 vehicles pass through our city daily on Highway 412. Currently 670 active commercial business licenses. John Brown, the university, has approximately 1,400 full-time staff and students. Siloam Schools District is about 4,300 students, 650 staff and teachers, and police officers. A lot of times people just think, the regular folks, that police officers don't work 24/7, but it's like fire. We're here 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year, even on holidays. So I just think that's important to put out there. Some of the things that we do other than policing is extra police services contracts with businesses, churches. In 2019, we were involved in 25 special events. Evidence just came through in 2019 through our evidence tech. 3,040 items were disposed, and he also disposed drug evidence as 556 items. Calls of service. In 2015, I basically went back 5 to 6 years. So 2015, we had 17,780 calls of service. You see where it fluctuates a little bit, 16, 17. Currently, we're projected to do 18,000 calls of service just this year. Felony cases worked. In 2016, you see we're 588. Every year it kind of jumps up a little bit. In 2016, we had 2 detectives. We have 4 today. Again, where you see 718 in 2020, one of the issues that I have as chief of police is some complaints I get, or they're not getting called back on some felony cases that they have. A lot of that is because patrol are probably working 50 to 60% of those cases, and our long-term growth, I'll talk further, is to get away from that and have detectives handle those cases. Traffic accidents work. Just this year, we're projected, or as of November, we worked 322 traffic accidents. Our arrests and transports. 2016, 1,431 total arrests. In 2020, we're looking at 1,493. Arrests and transport. So when you see arrests and transport, let's go to the year in 2020. We've actually physically transported 561 suspects, cited and released. Due to COVID, and a lot of the jail wasn't taking prisoners that time. And again, it's officer discretion a lot of times. If we can cite and release, that's good too. One of the notes that I have, though, you got to understand as a board, when we transport somebody, so 561 transports, that's a minimum of 2 hours that he arrests someone's in the city, transports to Benton County, and comes back. So again, we'll talk a little further about that. PD overtime, you can look at that. for the years projected, in 2019, we had 4,681. Now, this overtime is just for police only, sworn personnel. This year, we're going to have 2,440 hours of overtime, which is down 22%, which, again, a lot of that was due to COVID, with SROs not being in school, with schools shutting down. We were able to take the SROs, put them on the street, and help with patrol. So again, we didn't have to call in extra folks as we had them. Our training completed per year in 2017, about 3,755 hours. In 2019, all the way up to 9,484. 2020, we've done 2,442. That seems like a lot less, but due to COVID, we weren't able to do a lot of training. But what I like about that, the state requires each officer to do 24 hours of training. For times 40 officers, that's 960 hours. Our department goes above and beyond to make sure that we're well trained. So again, this year, 2,442 hours, and we're only required to do 960. Current staffing levels, we currently have 5 administrations sworn, 4 criminal investigation division, CID, 5 school resource officers, 25 patrolmen. We had 1 unfilled patrolman position at this time, 12 dispatchers, 1 administrative assistant, 3 records clerk, and 1 evidence tech. Our historic staffing levels, I did it in 5-year increments. If you go 2005, where we were 50 personnel, and jump forward to 20, we're at 7. So we've gained 7 personnel in approximately 15 years. And you can see where our populations have grown, our calls of service, our daily calls per service. And what that is when you see the daily calls per officer in 2020 is 4.93. That's an officer, that's a patrol officer. That's not CID, that's not SRO, that's not admin. Those are patrol officers responding to those calls. He's averaging almost 5 calls a day. That's including traffic accidents, that's including transports, that is including, if he has 5 transports, he's probably got 4 hours of reports. And then our officers per 1,000, in 2005, we were 2.04. And as of today, we're 2.26. So we're a little bit under the average, but we have a plan going forward, which I'll talk to you in a bit. And then the civilian sworn, if you look at that UCR report, it talks about civilian and sworn. And I think it's 3.5. We're right at 3.33. So we're doing pretty well. SSPD, planning for the future growth. Siloam Springs Police Department increased and updated their vehicle fleet this year by adding 13 new vehicles, and that's through the leasing program. In 2021, a traffic motor unit will be implemented with addition of 2 PD motorcycles. The remodel of the police department with ballistic shielding and future growth of offices will be completed at the end of this month. The police department was awarded a recertification accreditation. We will do our final inspection on the 15th. Our AWINS migration project is completed. We still got just a few little things to finish up the next couple of weeks. And then we just transitioned from 40 caliber weapons to 9mm without any increase in budget, which will actually show a decrease in spending in ammunition because it's cheaper and our officers are more accurate. So I'm excited about that. Future growth continued. Creation of a SWAT team implemented. They started training about a month ago. They will not be active till they're totally functional and trained, which could be, several more months. Restructure patrol staffing and supervision. I think I've got comments from the board since I've been here that they saw a lot more officers on the streets. There's a lot more visible. I just kind of repositioned officers on other duties and made sure our patrol is strong. Allowed increased presence in the community. When I've got here, I think we have 4 dispatchers. We hired 7 additional team members. We formed an Operation Safe Summer. We did a street crime unit, was formed and utilized, and the results were very outstanding as I've read those stats to you before. And then we also transfer primary weather control to the fire department and became secondary. Our future needs, a temporary holding facility at the jail. This will help cut back those transports. And when we talk about a holding facility, it's not trying to keep them overnight. Instead of doing, say we make 10 arrests a day, that's 10 transports in a 24-hour period, which could be 24 hours. I would like to hold them and every 6 hours do one transport and cut back to 4 transports. That'll help with wear and tear, vehicle, keep our officers in our city, so something's going forward. To do that, the purchase of a transport van, the addition of 10 sworn officers are needed, 2 additional detectives in the Criminal Investigation Division, 2 officers for the motor unit, 3 officers for the SCU and narcotics unit, and 3 additional officers for patrol. In those numbers, 3 officers have been approved to go into effect January 1, 2021, so we're excited about that. And then officers are planned to be added in 2022 budget. Again, it depending how the budget goes, how the economy goes, but that's our plans right now. I would also like to add 1 additional officer per year for the next 4 years, starting in 2023 as needed. This will add an additional 10 officers over the next 6 years. Each officer costs about $61,700 per officer. That's my report. Is there any questions that I can help answer?
I know everybody wants to go home, but I did ask that we get this information, and I want to explain a few things. We talk about economic development, and we talk about growing our city, and we want to bring people into our city, and we want to keep them safe while they're here. And we have seen a neighboring city, Springdale, and we've seen what happened when they did not prepare their fire and police, and the gangs took over. And I am all for economic development, and I am all for the services that we are bringing. But I'm also all for protecting our officers and protecting our firemen when they go out to a scene. And so I do have a lot of questions from this data. Is 6 years efficient? I mean, for all the Director Burns asked for the information on the housing. Well, if we bring in all that housing, how's that going to affect taking 6 years to bring in more officers?
Yes,
I
ma'am.
mean, I want to be safe. I want my family safe in this community. That's what I want my tax dollars spent on. I believe in spending our tax dollars on infrastructure and taking care of our community. I am for pet projects, but you have to support our infrastructure to have your pet projects. And if it means giving up the safety of my family to have a pet project, I'm not for it, and I will be loud about that. I am ready to protect our officers and our community and not let what happened to Springdale happen to our community. And I want to know, what are we going to do in the future to protect us? Because you know they look at our bedroom communities like that, and that they see that they're growing, and that's where gangs go in, and that's where crimes start to increase. So what are we going to do? And is 6 years efficient?
The big problem today, myself and Mr. Patterson have conversations weekly about this. You could tell me today, hey, Alan, go out and hire 10 guys today. The problem is finding those quality police officers. I've been trying to fill 3 positions for 6 months. I have 1 left, and that will be filled shortly. Is finding that quality. Again, it goes back to budget. It goes back to the economy. Would I like a quicker plan? Yes, ma'am. But again, I think we have a good plan in place going forward. If 5 to 6 years I could get 10 officers, I'm very excited about that. I think that'll put us in a really good position. Does that kind of answer your question?
And you talk about having, you added 7 officers, I think, in the last couple of years. But I also, because I did come up through the police department ranks, I also am familiar with the school resource officers. They're only used for the public service for 3 months out of the year. The rest of the time, the 9 months, they're at the school. Is that in your counts? And does that lower that number even more?
You are correct, but we do have an agreement in the contract that if I do have emergency, I can pull them from the schools, but contracted, that's where they're gonna be their entire shift. There's the 5 officers gonna be there, so it does skew those numbers a little bit.
And if you pull them from the school, who's protecting our children?
Yes, ma'am. And again, it's during the daytime when the officers or when the SROs are in, we're pretty full, because even when we're just patrol, say we have 6 officers per shift. If you have 6 officers per shift, we also have 3 to 4 CID there that day. I also have 5 admin. So any given day, I have 15 officers on the street. Again, all of us can go out and handle a call, so hopefully it never gets to that point where I have to pull SROs from there. In the future growth, I would like to see my patrol get up to 8 officers per shift. But again, I plan for the worst case scenarios. This is what me and Mr. Pastor sat down and talked about. I've talked to it about the other directors. Again, we all have needs, and I just think it's I plan for the worst and hope for the best, but I always plan for the worst.
Well, what prompted this, and I'll say it, is when we had that shooting at that gas station. Are you familiar with it? I don't know if you
Yes,
were
ma'am.
here at the time.
Yes, ma'am.
And I know this is something that's been handed to you, and I'm not blaming you. I want to bring out the issue that I think we need to face. And so when I drive by there, we have brass directing traffic. And what I mean by brass is they're the administrative staff. That's maybe your chief or your lieutenants, or so everybody knows what I'm talking about when I say brass. We had to call in help from other agencies. And so how many officers, by what I seen out there and being familiar with the police department, how many officers were protecting the city outside that call?
I think we had 5 on that night, because when you have 6 on shift, you're always going to have someone on vacation or they're on leave, and then you have someone calling sick, so you're 4. So if we get to that number, we usually call an overtime person in to at least keep 5 on the streets. So again, you're going to answer your question. I think after all the perimeters were set up, I think we had 2.
Protecting the whole rest of the 17,000
Yes, ma'am.
citizens.
Correct.
These are the kind of issues I want to bring up. We quit looking at infrastructure, and it's frustrating to me. When I was running for office, and then here recently, all of a sudden, infrastructure is important when there's an election going on, but then we forget about it the rest of the time, and we want to do all these pet projects, and everybody's like, well, where's the funding going to come from? Well, let's stop looking at projects for a little bit and support our staff, support our fire department, support our police department, support our streets, and get our streets up to standards. And so that's why I asked for these numbers. There's so many questions, and I won't ask them all, but there are so many questions I could ask that would bring out a lot of details that should scare us and should scare our citizens, and it's frustrating to me. And so one thing that wasn't in there is agency assist. I don't know if you can get that information, but I would like to see how much agency assist that we get, because every time I see that we have a major crime, I see agency assist in there.
What we do, since I've been here, I'll be here a year, January 6th. I think we've asked agency, and again, even when we had that armed robbery that night, we were just calling Benton, because we have a very good relationship. That's something that since I've been here, is building relationships. I think that's important. Because if they need us, we're going. Like during the marches, we went and assisted Fayetteville and other people. We support each other. But I know of 2 incidents where they actually didn't come in and cover calls. It's just, hey, if we get in a situation, just know we're covering this, and we might need your assistance. Or they come in and help us set up perimeters. Because again, when we're how Siloam is set up, we've got to let West Siloam know, because we got a description of a vehicle. Is he going to go past the casino? Is he headed to Tiny Town? So it's letting everyone know, and that's being on this new AWINS frequency too. We're going to be able to communicate a lot better.
I appreciate your information and all the hard work you put into it, but I just want everybody to understand why I asked for this information.
Yes,
and
ma'am.
why I'll continue pursuing it is because for the best interest of our citizens and
I
our community.
I feel like we have a good plan going forward.
Mr. Mayor?
Brad?
Hey, Chief, I appreciate it, and I'm one that, I don't want, all the details left in public, because it's like giving a terrorist a nuclear bomb and telling the instructions on how to ignite it. I don't want to know how Israel, takes out a, suspect. These are things I don't want to know. I do want to be clear, is that, we don't violate public safety because of quality of life or economic development projects. So let's be clear of that. And if you live in paranoia, I can't control that. But I do know we've hired a city administrator, we've approved a budget, and that's what we're going with. And we've hired you, not guys like me in the past. I'm a retired fireman. I don't tell Chief Kreiner, I have no concerns. Because if I had a concern, I'd take it to the city administrator and he would address it. He has addressed it. And you're the new police chief. And we have to give you time to implement your plan.
Yes, sir.
And we will provide you the funding. There's no doubt. So let's get that seed out. There's no doubt. PD and FD will receive funding and have received funding. Let's not get paranoid. There's one board member here that's paranoid. I'm totally secure. Thank you for your service.
Yes, sir.
Mr. Mayor,
Carol?
I appreciate all the time that you spent putting this report together, and this does have a lot of information. And I think fire and police are number one. And I want to make sure you're funded the way you need to be. But we have to spread it around because everybody gets a little bit.
Yes, ma'am.
But safety is important to me, whether other people think it or not, but it is number one to me. And I think that's what makes our town what it is that we are a safe community right now. I think we've even gotten a designation that we're one of the safest communities in the state of Arkansas.
Yes, ma'am. I've been doing this 28 years. I feel confident enough in this board and Mr. Patterson. If I think we were in dire straits, I would come to him immediately and say, hey, I need 6 or 7 officers today. But like you're saying, we meet as a staff and we talk about the needs of each person's division. So when I came forward with, hey, this is the plan, and it was approved, this budget to get 3 officers and 3 next years, I'm excited. I think that's going to put us in a really good position. If the economy will still keep going well for us here in Siloam, and we add an additional officer for the next 4 or 5 years, I think we're going to be in tremendous shape.
And I appreciate that, because that is why you are hired, is because you know what is the best for our community. And like you said, if you feel like you need to do something more, then please tell us.
Sure.
And I think that you would.
I think we have a great plan moving forward. I'm excited about it.
I think so too. Thank you.
Any other questions? All right, thank you.
Chief Kreiner?
Thank you, Mayor and Board. Jeremy Kreiner, Fire Chief. I'll get this pulled up here and run through it as quickly as possible. So in order to discuss fire department staffing, it's always important to understand a little bit about what the intricacies of the fire department are. The first thing that's interesting is we don't necessarily just cover Siloam Springs and our city. We also cover, via contract, 14 square miles into Oklahoma, as well as 37 square miles in unincorporated Benton County outside of our city limits. So you can see our total response area is actually 5 times greater than the city itself. You can see in this picture, this is just everything in green there is part of our response area. This is roughly the city. Everything in green is the rural area in Benton County that we respond to. This is Oklahoma, the portion that we cover. This is the Arkansas-Oklahoma state line. This is Highway 412. We run approximately 7 miles outside of our city and operate roughly 1 mile north and south of Highway 412, give or take. So roughly 14 square miles in Oklahoma we cover as well. So I like to show things in picture format. So every stick person that you see here represents a firefighter on our department. If you look at the total number of staff, it is 51, and that seems like a high number. But when you break that down into 24-hour coverage for 365 days a year, operating on 3 shifts out of 3 fire stations, it does start to diminish very quickly. And so as we walk through here, on a normal staffing day, we have a total of 15. So every day, whether it's 2 o'clock in the morning, on a Saturday, whether it's a Thanksgiving Day, Christmas Day, regardless, there's always going to be up to 15 members. Now, we operate on a minimum staffing level, which says basically with sick leave, FMLA, workers' comp issues, vacations, we can drop to as low as 12 people per day. So at any given time, and we've discovered this over the last 2 weeks, we've had 5 building fires, and out of those 4 out of the 5 have been on a time frame where there were 12 members there. And so we operate on that model, and that's how we set up our staffing. If you look down at how that is broken down by fire station, you'll see how those minimum of 12 line out. So there's 5 or 6 individuals at Fire Station 1. So 2 of those will be assigned to an ambulance, 3 of those will be assigned to a fire engine, and then the one at Fire Station 1 is the incident commander, the shift commander, who's responsible for all the incident command activities during that shift. Fire Station 2 has 3 people assigned. And then Fire Station 3, we operate on a cross-staff model. And so basically what that means, if there's an ambulance, we're going to take those 3 individuals and we're going to assign them to that ambulance, and they're going to go to the call. If it's a fire call in that area, then the 3 of them will jump on that fire engine and they'll go on the call, thus placing the other unit out of service. So there would be no staff available to respond to that incident. We also have a fair amount of reserve vehicles. So when one's in the shop, we have one that can jump in as well. We have some specialty vehicles like wildland brush pumpers, water rescue boats, other rescue trucks, off-road vehicles for different types of hazards that we face. We have other vehicles that we don't dedicate staff to those, but we use them as needed on certain incidents. So if you look at what we've done over the last 5 years as far as incident breakdown, you can see that our actual emergency incidents, which are represented in blue, are on a downward trend. So 2017 was the peak at just over 3,500. Most of the downward decline began in 2019, and that's when we reduced the size of our rural or unincorporated Benton County response area. So that went from 116 square miles down to 37. So we lost about 400 EMS calls in 2019. And we're on track to basically run the same amount of incidents this year. Now, the important thing to note in this slide, though, is the orange graph, and that is unit responses. So think of an incident as one incident gets one vehicle, okay? So if you have a medical emergency, you'll get one ambulance. That will count as one unit response. When you have more significant incidents, so for instance, a house fire, a hazardous materials incident, motor vehicle collision, you will get more than one unit response to that incident. So you'll get 3 for a motor vehicle collision, or you'll get 5 for a house fire. So the important thing that I take away from this graph is that although our number of incidents are declining, the significance of those incidents are increasing. And so that is the takeaway from this that I've taken away. If you look at the next slide, this is the number of times over the last 5 years. The left side set, those 6 numbers are the last 6 years. The number of times we've went out and given aid to other departments. So another fire department has an incident and they need some assistance, we respond. The set of bars on the right are the number of times we've received aid in return. So if you look in this year, over here, 22, what we've done year to date, that seems like a lot, but in the grand scheme of 3,000 incidents, that's really less than 1%. So it's not a huge deal of time that we're requesting outside aid or giving outside aid. When you look at overtime hours, this is another stat that was requested. The 2020 number is a year-to-date number back in mid-November when we pulled this information, so that will increase, but it is still on the downward trend. 2017, for a variety of factors, was high. That was our highest number of emergency incidents in recent history. Also, we had several members out on long-term injury and other illness. So when we talk about fire department staffing, how do we determine staffing levels? It's not as easy as just looking at a population, because the demographics are different. The type of population, is it totally bedroom community? Is it spread out? Does all your population leave and go somewhere else during the day, or do you have an influx of people during the day? Looking at the size of the jurisdiction, right? So we've talked about economic development and us being a hub. We're a little different than other cities in our region. We don't have as much access to mutual aid that have similar capabilities as us. If we want aid from a similar agency, we need to call around Springdale and bring them in. It takes a longer amount of time. And also the services provided. So we provide EMS, which is a much different area than a lot of fire departments do. Northwest Arkansas is somewhat unique and it's more prevalent, but across the state it's not very prevalent at all for fire departments to provide transport paramedic ambulances. And then also the big factor being the hazards that we face. So we're not simply a bedroom residential community. We have a mixture of industry. We have a mixture of a rail car that has hazardous materials running through it daily. All those things kind of jump in and factor into how we determine what our community risk is and what that risk assessment tells us. But there is one thing that we can look at. So when it comes to fire protection, the National Fire Protection Association publishes consensus standards, which says basically this is best practice for your industry. And 1710, which is for career fire departments and how to look at your community risk profile and determine what level of staffing and response you need, that says for a single family dwelling fire, which they consider in the grand scheme of things a lower risk, lower hazard, even though by all counts it is very hazardous to operate within one. It says you need a total response force at a minimum of 16 or 17 if you use an aerial device, on the scene, assembled and ready to operate within 8 minutes. And there's important reason for that, which we'll talk about here with the next slide. But I'll just hit on the number 17 with an aerial device. ISO, which grades fire departments and provides that information to insurance companies, which a lot of insurance companies use to decide homeowners insurance. They use that number to say an aerial device is used, right? Or is an aerial device used? And ISO says, based on our demographic here, that we do need an aerial device in play, and we do have one. So that's where the number 17 is going to come into play here in just a little bit. As the risk level increases with apartments, you'll need 27 firefighters on the scene within that 8 minutes. And high-rise buildings, 42 within that 8-minute response. So the reason, again, that is so important is because it's within 8 minutes. Think of fire as growing exponentially, right? If it's got the appropriate amount of fuel, the appropriate amount of oxygen, it will grow exponentially. And so if you take a fire that is confined to the room of origin, so we'll look at these numbers right here. A fire confined to a bedroom or to a kitchen or to a living room, you can see the civilian death rates, the civilian injury rates, and then the dollar loss per fire. If that fire spreads beyond that room, to the next bedroom, to the hallway, to the dining room, wherever that is, the numbers don't just go up a little bit. You can see that the civilian death rate increases by 9 times, the civilian injury rate increases 3 times, and then the average dollar loss per fire increases over 8 times. So when it talks about the effective force within 8 minutes, that's the importance of that. We're trying to find and not just limit the fire spread, but also find survivable victims. And that's going to require us getting into that hazardous environment very quickly. So if we talk staffing, and historically, in 2007, we added firefighters, which brought us up to 42 total shift personnel, which equates to an 11-person minimum per day. We went through a period of about 10 years. I came here in 2016, and City Administrator Patterson asked me to look into our staffing level and our overall operations. And based on that, we decided, well, we do need to make some adjustments. And so in 2018, we added 3 total firefighters, which brought our minimum staffing level up from 11 to 12. And then in 2021, we added 1 more position, which we're putting in as a float position, and that's mostly to help with overtime usage, and if we have a member out for long-term military leave or injury, we can assign that person to that shift to help limit some overtime. That'll play out in the future where hopefully we can continue to build on this staffing model, and we'll show you that here in just a second. So here's where we want to go to, and here's what our plan is. So a future normal day, we want to have that 17 firefighters per day. We want to have those members available to do the job. We understand that there's still vacations to be had, there's still sick usage, there's still injuries and other FMLA issues. And so we will be able, with 6 new personnel, to raise our minimum staffing up to 14. And that's gonna provide us a huge amount of redundancy, and I'll go over that in the next slide. Of course, all this is budget dependent, and based on how everything goes, the other needs in the city. Already approved in 2021 is the 1 firefighter, the float position. 2022, the plan would be to add 2 more firefighters. We could increase our staffing level to 13 per shift. And then in 2023, we potentially would add 3 more, which would bring us to that minimum staffing level of 14. If the float position plays out like we think it would, then in 2024, we would shoot for 1 more firefighter to refill that float position from that point forward. And then from that point, we would be staffed very, very well, and any growth from that point would be based on community growth and other avenues and risks that we may encounter. How that would break down is, you remember the cross-staffing model at Fire Station 3, that would allow 2 more folks to be stationed out there per day and uncross-staff these 2 units. And that's huge because it allows us to have another emergency response vehicle, that extra added layer of redundancy in the event that we're responding to multiple incidents or 1 large incident. And then if we weren't at minimum for the day, we would operate fully staffed at 17. If we're at 16 or 17 for the day, if nobody's on vacation or if nobody is out sick, we would have the ability to also do the same at Fire Station 2 and have a 3rd additional ambulance. So that's really the future breakdown of what we would do with those 6 positions over the next few years. So with that, I'd be happy to take any questions.
Ready? Go ahead.
Thank you for putting that all together. It's the same, with ambulance calls, because I've had to use the ambulance for my daughter on a couple of times. And so when I call, I like you to show up and at a reasonable time, because it's my family that I'm paranoid about. My 1-year-old daughter that's coughing up blood and they thought was going to die. I want the ambulance to show up in a timely manner. And so, again, that's why I ask these questions. I want to make sure that our citizens are taken care of. Thank you.
Brad?
Sure.
Well, I mean, we're in your wheelhorse here.
No, I clearly stated, I'm just an old
Wheelhouse,
retired guy
excuse
with
me.
a very nice beard I'm working on, not as good as others in the audience, but I will say this, since I've retired, and oddly enough, about 2 weeks after retirement, I sat right here on this board, and happy to do so. And Jeremy, may or may not be aware, but some wheels were in motion, and this board made some great decisions, and the citizens of the town backed through their vote the funding that provided the very foundation that presentation was brought. It was very excellent. Our fire department has the best apparatus it's ever had in its history, and I could tell you some stories, and that require beverages, and it doesn't rhyme with water. But the whole deal is that the board has made decisions, the citizens of the community backed it, and you're implementing that plan. And if you fail that plan, the city administrator addresses it. But I know, as Chief Kreiner, you're doing an excellent job. Keep up the good work, and just don't let people fall out of the training tower.
Thank you.
I find it humorous, but I know they're in pain, so I won't laugh in public. But I appreciate it, and I thank the board and the citizens for providing public safety. I think Director Smiley clearly stated it. Under AML guidelines, one of our primary duties are provide public safety, along with infrastructure. But I just want to make it clear, and I'm not gigging on Director Rissler, I can't allow us to set a seed that we're not providing that, and that we have these pet projects, because that is not true. What we have is multiple opportunities in the city of Siloam Springs. It is a fantastic time for all of us to be on the board. And I hope Bob Coleman, his last meeting's coming up. We'll have a new board of directors on there, and I'm excited because people want to be on the board. We've had more runoffs on the board, and they want to participate. They want to support you, and they want to provide this community moving forward. And the way we do that is continue that growth. And that growth is keeping that sales tax up. We do that through projects that tie into economic development. They're not pet projects. They create funding so you can get your personnel. I want you to have full houses with a lot of drama, and you have to do paperwork. That is my goal. And I will do everything within my power to make sure that we provide you that long-term funding. And I'm excited about it, and I thank Director Rissler for asking for that data, just like I did with the housing. We all have genuine concerns, and I think we've addressed them tonight. And I look forward to going in, and your biggest problem is the same with PD. There is a generation of human beings on the planet that are not lining up for public safety. You are struggling to get quality personnel. And I could tell you it's been that way at every fire department out there. And so I hope there's some folks coming up. I know you preach it at high schools. There's programs out there. And I hope people understand public safety is a great career. And it's not about the retirement, because there's a lot of baggage with that job. It's a heavy job. It's a heavy burden to take into retirement with you. There's a lot of stuff floating around in your head. But it is a worthy job to put yourself, put you before others. I mean, you're there. You're sticking it out for people you don't even know. You guys see the worst of this community. You don't always get to see the best. And we don't know when you're running. We hear your sirens, but we don't know what that call is. So on a personal note, I do thank you. You've been on Montclair multiple times, and I don't even know half of those firemen, but I'm meeting them by doing lift assist. So they're helping me in my situation with lift assist. So, and you lose a few. There's fire departments, you know, some people stay 30 years, some people stay 5. It's an odd job. It's the same way with the PD. It's tough to be a public servant. And I hope we give you all the tools possible, and that includes funding, so that you can meet those goals, staff, and everything that you just presented. And when we fall short of that, then it's on us as the board, because we just approved the budget. So if we see that in the budget there's a lack of funding, then we need to start discussing that in the budget meeting. But we're going forward in the new year. You got the money you got. And PD's doing great stuff. You're doing good stuff, and keep up the good work. So I thank you.
Brad, I remember the first AML meeting I attended. That was drilled into us, and it is still to this date, that the number one job of the city government is public safety. Utilities, everything comes hand along with that, but public safety, and that's the government, our United States, our federal government, that's their number one priority, is the safety of our citizens. And it don't come cheap these days. But I applaud board members for recognizing that we will have the backs of PD and FD to make sure that if their money is there.
Well, I certainly appreciate the kind words, and I'll speak for Chief Gilbert in saying thank you for the support you have shown us. So.
Mr. Mayor?
Yes.
I just want to tell you that I'm also thank you, and I do thank Director Rissler for bringing this up, but I do think that the time to talk about money is, like Brad said, is at the budget meetings, which we've already had. But I appreciate the jobs that you're doing. I appreciate all of our public service people and emergency services, and for what you brought to us tonight. Thank you.
Thank you, Chief. Thank you, Chiefs. Thank you.
Thank you, Philip, for putting that together.
Yeah. Philip, I think everything else on this is yours until we get to director reports.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor and board, and thank you, chiefs. They worked hard to put the information together and try to, I apologize if we didn't talk about the assist on the TV oversight and trying to make sure we were trying to answer the questions that you had. It is a concern that we want to make sure that we have the staffing that they need. And you can ask them privately. You know, I've not tried to draw a line in the sand and say you don't get what you need by any means. I will add that there will be an important decision in the near future as it relates to public safety. And it is the split of the 1 cent sales tax. In 2013, the city asked the residents to split the 1 cent sales tax from its 80-20% in streets and general fund to 40% streets and 20% police and 20% fire equipment and 20% general fund. And in 2023, that split goes back to its 80-20. That split today at 20% of that 1 cent sales tax provides about $750,000 each. Is that roughly? In equipment money for police and fire. Increasing personnel, Chief Gilbert said $61,000, I think, per patrolman. For firefighter, it's about the same, $63,000. But as we increase that personnel, the need to have equipment's going to increase also. So it's going to be a question at some point, are you willing to ask the voters to continue that split? And if not, if it doesn't, if you don't ask, or if you ask and it doesn't pass, there's $1.5 million that you're going to have to find out of the general fund. So I think it's very important to keep that in mind as we continue to press this issue and move forward. But that's all I'll say on that. Speaking of the police, and I'm sorry, you've got the October financials in your packet. If you have any questions, you can talk to Christina or myself if you have any questions on that. But speaking of the police department, I want to recognize Sergeant James McFerrin. His leadership in the street crime unit this summer provided the opportunity for this new organization in Northwest Arkansas, Adopt a Cop program, who has awarded Sergeant McFerrin the Community Impact Award for his leadership in the street crime unit. During that 3-month period, they made 67 arrests. One of those was a federal fugitive, along with seizures of a number of drugs and over $17,000 in drug money. So congratulations to Sergeant McFerrin. Please let him know that we appreciate his service. I've listed 4 different expenditures that I need to report as it relates to warehouse model in the electric department, $36,900 for red dirt class 7 base as it relates to that warehouse model. Again, in the electric department, $43,348 for some pad mount transformers for inventory. In the wastewater treatment plant, $49,889.25 for polymer as part of that process to the biological process to deal with that waste. And in the street and infrastructure division, $48,000 for subgrade material for the Kenwood rebuild project. Our COVID numbers continue to be high. I provided you the numbers there, but as of November 16th, we were seeing a substantial increase in the number of new cases per 10,000 residents from the prior 14-day period. We went from 47 to 63 new cases. We're back down as of the 23rd to 45, but I am concerned to see what the numbers are that come out after Thanksgiving. As of the 23rd, our total cases were over 1,000, almost 1,100 cases, or 62 cases per 1,000 residents, and it's giving you the breakdown of those numbers as far as the tracking of that. I emailed you today, and we put it on Facebook and the city's website, that I've had to close the utility billing department and the utility billing payments department or division as of tomorrow. tomorrow that, that division will be closed due to COVID-related isolation and quarantine. I will be bringing in one employee who can process payments by phone call and do some of the online work. But unable to do that, I can't have any other employees in that division. I can't bring in any other employees to backfill that. So as the beginning of COVID, when we closed off some of the public facilities, closed off to the public, I'm doing that basically again starting tomorrow. City Hall is all but closed. If you have appointments, you'll be able to get into City Hall. You'll be able to make your payments like we have done in the past with online, the Dropbox, by mail. If you have cash payments, you can call the number that we'll post and we'll make arrangements for you to be able to come into City Hall and make those cash payments. During this time, it's going to be closed through Friday the 11th. During this time, we're going to go back to the same process we did when we originally closed it. We're not going to be doing any shutoffs. We're not going to charge late fees, and we won't charge the 3% credit card fee during that basically a week and a half until we get through some of the isolation and quarantine issues and get staff back in there. I will tell you that that decision was not made lightly. We have done everything we can to try to keep it open, but at this point, I just don't have the staff. And to be able to continue to be able to take phone payments and do what we need to do, I have to make a trade-off and have that person working there, isolate them, and then to move forward accordingly. So I'll be happy to answer any questions if you have on that, but that's where we are today. Throughout this pandemic, we have not had too many incidences of COVID affect the city operations, but this was one that did, and I have to take the appropriate action. Beyond that, Mr. Mayor and Board, I think that is my my report. Director Staffington, I'll be in touch later this week to try to work with you on the issue of the formatting for the quarterly reports.
Do we need to vote on that? We need a motion on that one, Phil. Okay. Nope. I'm just gonna pass this thing on. We've been here long enough. Marla? Excuse me. Lisa, starts with you. You get to finish and adjourn. Lisa?
I know everybody wants to leave. I'll be quick. In the last week, I had a citizen report on an issue with trash, and Philip took care of it quickly, and he was swift about it. This is a good time to remind everyone why it's important that we make sure all our trash fits in the garbage can. We had a citizen put their trash out, and then their trash ended up in the neighbor's yard, and it was on Facebook, and it was publicized. And so try to make sure your lid closes. I'm guilty as anybody else that sometimes I'll try to push it down as much and it'll pop open just a little, but I did get a question from that, and I think it would answer a lot of questions for a lot of citizens, is are we limited on the amount of trash we can produce as a household due to the limitation of the size of bin, since there's a limitation of the largest size of bin?
There is a limitation. It's a 96-gallon, I believe. 64 and 96-gallon bins are the option. The original intent when we went to the once-a-week trash pickup was that your trash bin should have its lid closed. It's not always going to happen. But the problem sometimes is it does fall off if you have bagged trash. And it is our goal to pick that up. In this particular case, I think the culprit was unbagged trash with the lid not closed and blowing or moving out. So very important to bag your trash, not leave it unbagged and throw it in there, especially if you can't close the bin. If you have more trash, if you're generating more trash than you can ever use that 96-gallon bin, then the option is to get a second trash bin.
Okay, so you can't get another bin. And then I would like to request whenever we and this is a request I can make, but I would like to get the documentation that we get for, as a board of directors. If we can get it like by noon on Monday, so we have time to actually analyze it before we come to the meeting. Like, we got the information for the PD and fire department, and I know it wasn't for an agenda item, but I couldn't look over it because I was sitting with somebody that's passing away. And so if we could get it in a more timely manner, I know it's hard sometimes. Oh, okay. Okay. Okay, do citizens have access to that before, like, I know we get it before the board meeting. Do citizens have access to that? We don't know, just wait. Okay, okay. And that's all the questions I have. And thank you, Philip, for taking care of that. You jumped right on it and got it taken care of, and they were very happy about that. Thank you.
Reed?
We have officially entered the Christmas season. Very glad for that. I just want to encourage everyone to remember your neighbor. Remember those in need. Show that kindness that we all have inside of us. I know it's there. Thank you.
Carol?
Okay. Today is Giving Tuesday. And when I wrote this, I was going to say, you have time still if you're wanting to go online and give. But I'm not sure that you do, but there are several different websites. And I know the shelter has a spot if you're looking for places to give. Excuse me. The animal shelter is also closed, but they are doing some remodeling it's not due to COVID. But they also are needing shoes and toys and blankets and towels for the animals. And when I called them today, I asked them if we could leave things by the door in a box, and they said yes, that there is a bench, and you could leave them on the bench or under the bench. It's kind of, they've positioned it to where it's kind of covered so that the elements won't get to it, and there is at least one person there during the day. So if you're interested in donating some supplies to the shelter, they would be more than happy. They even said they would like to see if you have some used stuffed toys that maybe your children aren't using anymore, or they're kind of getting a little raggedy. The dogs like those. I also wanted to mention that there are 2 officers that are on their 5-year anniversary, Travis Looper and Nathaniel, and I can't pronounce the last name, but I think he goes by Van Pye. So I would just want to congratulate them on their 5 years. Thank you.
Carol. Bob?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I appreciate Mr. Director Burns' comment that I'm on a short string here, and that's very true. I've had quite a deal the last few months. It has been one that I wouldn't care to go through again. And I feel like since I've got today and the 15th to make whatever comments I want to make about that, I better start now. I wrote them down so I don't have to get carried away. To my friends on the board and the future board members, I encourage you to treat one another with respect and dignity, and also to treat those who elected you with that same respect and dignity. Excuse me. To the general public, I strongly advise you listen carefully and study what is being said at the board meetings. If you have questions or you don't agree with what a board member has spoken, talk to that board member or the city administrator about the situation as soon as possible after the meeting. Gossip and false assumptions are not beneficial for the spreader or the hearer. The complaints about me that were submitted to the Ethics Board are a perfect example of what I'm saying. It's painfully obvious that the one who sent the Ethics Board those complaints did not fully understand the subjects about which he spoke even though he did solicit input from 2 board members whose names were mentioned in the complaint. The frivolity of the complaints was realized quickly and dismissed by the Ethics Board. My opinion is that the level of these complaints submitted was lower than a snake's belly. If anyone is interested in seeing my response to the Ethics Commission and why the complaint was so quickly dismissed, you're welcome to read my response to the complaint. These records of the Ethics Commission are all public documents, and they're available to anyone who seeks to look for them online. If one of the goals of Mr. Kennemore and his friends was to intimidate me, they failed miserably. I do not compromise my integrity for anyone or any purpose. At this time, I do not plan to seek sanctions for the libelous statements made against me, but you can rest assured that his and their actions have hurt my family and me deeply. We're living in very difficult days. My wife and I, along with thousands of other believers, have a daily alarm set on our phone at 8:00 p.m. every evening to pray for our country. We're in a desperate need of mercy from the Lord. The business of the city of Siloam Springs will carry on without me. I'm sure of that. Please know that it has been an honor and a great privilege and a blessing to serve you these past 8 years. Kathy's family lives here, and we love Siloam Springs. The people have been very, very good. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Bob. Thank you. Mindy?
Wow, that's hard to follow. Thank you for your service as a board member. I appreciate it, and I've enjoyed working with you. Thank you. Director Smiley, I have a feeling that these organizations will accept donations tomorrow and the next day and the next day.
Oh, I'm
so
sure
if you
they
didn't,
will.
if you didn't make it to the Giving Tuesday, I think we can probably continue donating even after today, and I know they appreciate it. But with that said, I know there are some organizations that have matching programs on Giving Tuesday, and so if you give on Tuesday, someone will match your gift. So they'll probably accept through midnight tonight for those matches. Only thing I have to say, a couple things here. First, kudos to Parks and Recreation for the Thanksgiving break scavenger hunt idea. Didn't get to participate in it myself, but I thought it was a great idea, and hopefully they did get a few participants in that. And also the Deck the House decorating contest is going on now. Those interested can register their homes from now through December 17th. I believe that's how I understand the rules to be. And then judging will start on the 18th. Winners will be announced on the 21st. And I'm excited about the excitement I think that generated. So thank you to the staff for making that happen.
Brad?
Director Coleman, I thank you for your service, and we've disagreed and agreed. And I've always appreciated your input and your thought process, and the diversity of the board's important, and integrity and ethics are also important, so I thank you for that. And then I thank Bob Coleman for being the light right now. You're a great light out there, great light for a lot of kids out in the community, so we appreciate that. And I don't want to forget Main Street recently won an award, A Minute in History. So if you ever have watched The Minute in History, it's great, needless history information about old buildings downtown in Siloam Springs. And so I'm glad they got that award, and I appreciate the work they do. Downtown is vibrant. We're not going to have the traditional parade, and the mayor can't wave his I never could figure out if it was an umbrella or a wand, but
Supposed to have been a candy cane, basically.
Oh, it was a candy cane. I could never see that far, but it's a little bit different this year, but it's still we're in that season, and I hope we don't forget that. So thank you very much.
I want to echo what others have said about Mr. Coleman. When we were first trying to get elected, and he just kind of took us under his wing and was a great example. And ditto what everybody else said. and I make a motion, we adjourn.
All right, thank you.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. I'm not gonna, I've got to head in there real quick. So, all those in favor of adjournment, say aye.
Aye.
Motion is approved. We have a motion to adjourn. We are adjourned. Woo pig sooie.